My name is Maya, and at 33 years old, I sat at the head of my own Thanksgiving table and watched my fiancé demand a break from our engagement so he could be with my younger sister. My parents smiled and told me to pack my bags. I gave them my blessing, signed his move-out papers, and walked out the door. What they did not know was that I owned the very house they were sitting in, and my signature just triggered their absolute ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your own blood betray you for a shiny illusion. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey sage stuffing and the expensive imported wine Marcus had insisted on pouring for everyone. We were sitting around the massive mahogany table in the formal dining room of our home, surrounded by my family. My mother Susan and my father Richard were seated to my right, hanging on to every word Marcus said. My younger sister Chloe sat directly across from me, her perfect blonde hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier. My brother Julian and his wife Jada sat near the end of the table. Jada was the only one who ever seemed to see through the suffocating pretense of my family. The evening had been progressing exactly as these family gatherings always did, with my parents loudly praising Marcus for his brilliant career as a hedge fund manager and complimenting Chloe on her recent social media milestones. I sat at the head of the table, quietly cutting my food, playing the role of the modest interior decorator they all believed me to be. Marcus stood up from his chair and tapped his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound immediately silenced the room. I looked up at him with a soft smile, fully expecting him to make a toast to our upcoming wedding. We were supposed to get married in exactly 4 months. Instead of looking at me, Marcus turned his gaze across the table and held out his hand. Chloe reached up and placed her hand in his, intertwining their fingers right over the centerpieces I had spent hours arranging. The breath completely left my lungs. I stared at their joined hands, unable to process what was happening right in front of my eyes. Marcus cleared his throat and puffed up his chest with that arrogant confidence he always carried. Maya. He began, his voice echoing in the sudden heavy silence of the dining room. I need to be honest with you and with everyone here. I am calling for a break in our engagement. The words felt like physical blows, but before I could even formulate a response, he continued. Chloe and I have realized that we have a connection we simply cannot ignore. We are soulmates, Maya. True love should not be stifled just because of a prior commitment. I know this is hard for you to hear, but I need you to be the bigger person and step aside. I sat perfectly still, the metallic taste of shock flooding my mouth. I looked around the table, desperately waiting for the outrage. I waited for my father to stand up and throw Marcus out of the house. I waited for my mother to reprimand Chloe for holding my fiancé's hand. I waited for anyone to defend me. The silence stretched on for several agonizing seconds. My heart hammered violently against my ribs as I looked from face to face. Julian looked down at his plate, avoiding my eyes completely. Chloe wore a sickeningly sweet expression of fake guilt, biting her lower lip as she clung to Marcus. Finally, I turned to my mother, silently begging her to intervene. Instead of defending me, my mother calmly picked up her linen napkin, dabbed the corners of her mouth, and reached for her wine glass with a long, calculated sigh. Maya, you really need to stop looking so dramatic, my mother, Susan said, taking a slow sip of her wine. You have always been far too independent and emotionally cold for a man like Marcus. He needs a woman who is nurturing, someone soft and caring like Chloe. You two were never a good match anyway. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a cold numbness wash over my entire body. My father Richard nodded in agreement, pointing his fork at me. Your mother is right, Maya. You have always been the tough one. You paid your own way through college. You bought your first car at 18. You have always managed to land on your feet. You will be completely fine. Chloe needs someone to take care of her, and Marcus is a phenomenal provider. Just pack your things quietly and move out of Marcus's house by the weekend. There is no need to make a scene and ruin Thanksgiving. The sheer audacity of their betrayal was staggering. They were sitting in a multi-million-dollar estate eating food I had paid for, demanding that I surrender my life to my sister because she was their golden child. Throughout my entire life, my family had treated my independence as a character flaw. They weaponized my ability to survive, using it as an excuse to neglect me, while subsidizing Chloe's entire existence. What none of them knew, not even Marcus, was that my modest interior decorating business was merely a cover. In reality, I was a self-made billionaire. I owned a massive real estate holding company through a blind trust. I had bought this very estate through my limited liability company 2 years ago. When Marcus and I moved in together, his fragile ego could not handle the idea of living in a house his girlfriend owned. To placate his pride, I drafted a fake lease agreement that made him believe he was the primary tenant and that he was paying the mortgage, while I secretly funneled his rent payments back into a joint savings account for our future. He truly believed this was his house, and my parents worshipped him for his supposed wealth. Chloe leaned forward, giving me a patronizing look. "I am so sorry, Maya. We did not mean to fall in love. It just happened. You can leave your wedding dress at the bridal boutique. I can probably get it altered to fit me since Marcus and I want to keep the venue date. You understand, right? I am not getting any younger." Before I could process my sister asking for my wedding dress, Marcus reached into his designer leather briefcase resting near his chair. He pulled out a crisp, thick legal folder and slid it across the table. It slid right through a puddle of spilled turkey gravy before stopping directly in front of my plate. "This is a formal breakup agreement," Marcus stated, adjusting his expensive tie. "I had my lawyers draft it yesterday. It states that you agree to mutually end the engagement, you surrender all claims to the wedding deposits, and most importantly, you agree to vacate my property within 30 days. If you sign it now, I will not charge you for the utility bills this month." I looked down at the gravy-stained legal document and then up at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family. They were eagerly watching me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to fight, so they could call me crazy and bitter. The trap they thought they were setting for me was actually the very mechanism that would destroy them. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my wine in Marcus's face, even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to destroy the dining room. Instead, I reached for my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the expensive vintage cool my burning throat. I set the glass down gently. With steady fingers, I reached for my left hand and slid the 3-carat diamond engagement ring off my finger. The heavy platinum band made a sharp, satisfying clink as I dropped it directly onto the center of the legal document Marcus had so arrogantly provided. I picked up the expensive fountain pen resting near my place card. Without bothering to read a single word of his ridiculous demands, I signed my name at the bottom of the page in bold, sweeping strokes. I capped the pen and pushed the folder back across the table. "I wish you both exactly what you deserve," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. I stood up from the head of the table, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. My mother scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Maya, stop with the dramatic retreat. Just go pack your bags so we can finish our dinner in peace." I did not look back at her. I turned around and walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors. I walked past the family portraits hanging in the hallway, past the antique console table, and opened the heavy oak front door. The crisp, freezing November air hit my face, shocking my system back to reality. I walked down the stone driveway toward my car, leaving the warmth and the lies of that house behind me. As I unlocked my car door, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. I turned to see Jada, my brother's wife, slipping out the side door of the house and hurrying toward me. Her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. Jada was a brilliant forensic accountant, a woman of sharp intellect and fierce loyalty, who had always treated me with genuine kindness. She opened the passenger door and slid into my car, bringing the scent of cold air and expensive perfume with her. She turned to me in the dim light of the street lamp, a wicked, knowing smirk playing on her lips. "They have absolutely no idea that you are the sole owner of the limited liability company that holds the deed to that entire estate, do they?" Jada asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. I started the engine, letting the heater warm the freezing car, and returned her smile with a cold, predatory grin of my own. "Not yet," I replied smoothly. Marcus was so eager to assert his dominance that he did not realize what he was actually handing me. By forcing me to sign that specific document, demanding I leave the premises, he inadvertently triggered the absolute unconditional eviction clause in the shadow lease I drafted for him 2 years ago. Jada let out a low, impressed chuckle, buckling her seatbelt as I shifted the car into drive. "So what is our next move?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with the promise of corporate warfare. I steered the car away from the estate, leaving Marcus and my treacherous family to enjoy their stolen turkey. "I am going to let them plan their stolen wedding," I said quietly, watching the house disappear in the rearview mirror. "And then we are going to take everything." "Maya, you really need to stop looking so dramatic," my mother Susan said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "You have always been far too independent and emotionally cold for a man like Marcus. He needs a woman who is nurturing, someone soft and caring like Chloe. You two were never a good match anyway." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a cold numbness wash over my entire body. The crystal chandelier above the dining table seemed to cast a harsh, unforgiving light on the scene unfolding before me. My own mother was sitting in my house drinking the expensive vintage wine I had purchased and calmly defending the man who had just publicly humiliated me to be with my younger sister. I looked across the table at Chloe. She was practically glowing, her fingers still tightly intertwined with Marcus's hand. She did not look sorry. She looked victorious. My father Richard nodded in agreement with my mother, pointing his silver fork directly at me. "Your mother is completely right about this, Maya. You have always been the tough one in the family. You paid your own way through college without asking us for a dime. You bought your first car at 18 while your sister was still figuring out her high school classes. You have always managed to land on your feet no matter what life throws at you. You will be completely fine after this little setback. Chloe, on the other hand, needs someone to take care of her. She is delicate. Marcus is a phenomenal provider, and he can give her the lifestyle she truly deserves. Just pack your things quietly and move out of Marcus's house by the weekend. There is absolutely no need to make a scene and ruin our Thanksgiving dinner." The sheer audacity of their betrayal was staggering. They were sitting in a multi-million-dollar estate eating food I had paid for and prepared, demanding that I surrender my life to my sister simply because she was their golden child. Throughout my entire life, my family had treated my fierce independence as a character flaw. They weaponized my ability to survive and succeed, using it as an excuse to neglect me, while endlessly subsidizing Chloe's entire existence. Every time Chloe failed out of a college course, my parents rushed in to pay the tuition again. Every time she maxed out a credit card on designer bags, my father quietly paid the balance to protect her credit score. I was expected to applaud her bare minimum achievements, while my own milestones were brushed aside as expected or ordinary. What none of them knew, not even Marcus, was that my modest interior decorating business was merely a highly effective cover story. I let them believe I was just scraping by decorating small suburban living rooms because I knew exactly what they would do if they discovered the truth. In reality, I was a self-made billionaire. I owned a massive real estate holding company through a completely blind trust. I had purchased this very estate through my limited liability company 2 years ago. When Marcus and I first moved in together, his fragile ego could not handle the idea of living in a house his girlfriend owned. He needed to feel like the provider, the big-shot hedge fund manager rescuing his hardworking fiancé. To placate his fragile pride, I drafted a fake lease agreement that made him believe he was the primary tenant and that he was paying the monthly mortgage. I secretly funneled every single one of his rent payments directly back into a joint savings account for our future. He truly believed this was his house, and my parents worshipped him for his supposed immense wealth. Chloe leaned forward over the table, giving me a patronizing, pitying look that made my stomach churn. "I am so sorry this had to happen this way, Maya. We really did not mean to fall in love behind your back. It just happened organically. Marcus and I just connect on a level that you could never understand. You are always so busy with your little decorating projects that you neglected his emotional needs. Oh, and by the way, you can just leave your wedding dress at the bridal boutique. I can probably get the seamstress to alter it to fit me since Marcus and I want to keep the venue date. You understand, right? I am not getting any younger, and the deposits are already paid. The room spun slightly as I processed my sister casually asking for my custom wedding gown just minutes after stealing my fiancé. I looked at my brother Julian, hoping he would finally say something, but he just stared down at his mashed potatoes, too cowardly to stand up to our parents. Beside him, Jada looked like she was ready to leap across the table and strangle someone. Her fists were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, and her eyes were burning with a fierce, protective anger. Julian placed a warning hand on her arm, forcing her to stay seated. Before I could even process the absolute absurdity of my sister's request, Marcus reached down to his side. He grabbed his designer leather briefcase, the one he carried everywhere to look important, and hoisted it onto his lap. The loud snap of the metal locks opening echoed in the quiet dining room. He reached inside and pulled out a crisp, thick legal folder. With a smug, triumphant smile plastered across his face, he slid the folder across the long mahogany table. It slid right through a puddle of spilled turkey gravy, leaving a greasy smear across the bottom, before stopping directly in front of my plate. "This is a formal breakup agreement," Marcus stated, adjusting his expensive silk tie and leaning back in his chair, like a king addressing a peasant. "I had my corporate lawyers drafted up yesterday afternoon. It states that you agree to mutually end our engagement without seeking any financial compensation. It explicitly states that you surrender all claims to the wedding venue, the floral deposits, and the honeymoon reservations. And most importantly, you agree to vacate my property completely within 30 days. If you sign it right now without making a fuss, I will be generous and not charge you for your share of the utility bills this month." I looked down at the gravy-stained legal document, the bold black letters declaring my eviction from my own life, and then looked up at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family. They were eagerly watching me. They were waiting for me to break down. They were waiting for me to scream and fight so they could call me crazy and bitter. They wanted to justify their horrific actions by pointing at my emotional reaction. The trap they thought they were setting for me was actually the very mechanism that would destroy them. 1,000 words. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my expensive wine in Marcus's arrogant face, even though every single instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up and destroy the dining room. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy calm of realization wash over me. The storm of panic and betrayal that had been raging in my chest instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I reached for my wineglass, lifting it with a perfectly steady hand, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The expensive vintage tasted bitter on my tongue, but it grounded me in the moment. I set the glass down gently on the coaster, making sure it did not make a single sound. Marcus let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "Come on, Maya. Do not draw this out. Just read the document and sign the bottom line. I am giving you a full 30 days to find a new apartment. That is more than fair considering the circumstances. Most men would throw you out tonight. You should be thanking me for my generosity." Chloe nodded vigorously, her hand still clutching his. "He is being incredibly kind to you, Maya. You should really appreciate how well he is handling this transition. And seriously, do not forget to call the bridal boutique tomorrow morning and transfer the dress authorization to my name. I want to get the alterations started by Monday." With steady, unshakable fingers, I reached over to my left hand. I gripped the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring that Marcus had given me just 6 months ago. It slid off my finger easily, leaving a pale indentation behind. The heavy platinum band caught the light of the chandelier one last time before I dropped it. It made a sharp, satisfying clink as it landed directly on the center of the legal document Marcus had so arrogantly provided. I did not bother opening the folder. I did not need to read a single word of his ridiculous, legally void demands. I picked up the expensive fountain pen resting near my place card. Without breaking eye contact with Marcus, I pressed the pen to the signature line on the front page. I signed my name in bold, sweeping strokes, pressing hard enough to leave an indent on the pages beneath it. I capped the pen with a sharp click and pushed the gravy-stained folder back across the table toward him. "I wish you both exactly what you deserve," I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any anger or sorrow. I pushed my heavy oak chair back and stood up from the head of the table. I took one final look at the beautiful Thanksgiving spread I had spent 2 days preparing. The golden turkey, the roasted vegetables, the warm bread rolls. It all looked like a plastic display in a fake house now. I smoothed the wrinkles from my dress and turned away from the table. My mother scoffed loudly behind me, clearly disappointed that she was not getting the dramatic meltdown she had anticipated. "Oh, please, Maya, stop with the dramatic silent retreat. Just go upstairs, pack your bags, and let us finish our dinner in peace. You always have to ruin the mood when things do not go your way." I did not look back at her. I did not acknowledge my father's exasperated sigh or Chloe's triumphant giggle. I simply walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pristine hardwood floors. I walked down the long hallway, passing the expensive family portraits and the antique console table I had sourced from a Parisian estate sale. I reached into the coat closet, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and opened the solid oak front door. The crisp, freezing November air hit my face instantly, shocking my system back to reality. The cold wind whipped my hair around my face as I walked down the long stone driveway toward my car. I was leaving the warmth and the suffocating lies of that house behind me forever. As I pulled my keys from my pocket and unlocked my car door, I heard the sudden rapid crunch of footsteps on the gravel driveway behind me. I turned around to see Jada slipping out the side door of the house. She was hurrying toward me, her winter coat pulled tightly around her shoulders to ward off the freezing wind. Jada opened the passenger door of my car and slid inside without asking for permission, bringing the sharp scent of cold air and expensive perfume with her. She turned to me in the dim yellow light of the street lamp. A wicked, knowing smirk was playing on her lips, and her eyes danced with a dangerous intelligence. "They have absolutely no idea that you are the sole owner of the limited liability company that holds the deed to that entire estate, do they?" Jada asked, her voice hushed with breathless anticipation. I started the engine, letting the heater roar to life to warm the freezing interior of the car. I looked at my brilliant sister-in-law and returned her smile with a cold, predatory grin of my own. "Not yet," I replied smoothly, shifting the car into gear. Marcus was so incredibly eager to assert his dominance and throw his weight around in front of my parents that he did not even realize what he was actually handing me. By forcing me to sign that specific document, demanding I leave the premises, he inadvertently triggered a very special clause. Jada leaned forward, completely invested. "What clause?" "The absolute unconditional eviction clause in the shadow lease I drafted for him 2 years ago," I explained, pulling away from the curb. When he signed his lease agreement, there was a stipulation that if he ever formally breaks his commitment to the primary property manager, his tenancy is immediately revoked. He just legally documented his own eviction. He thinks he gave me 30 days to move out of his house. In reality, he just gave me the legal right to throw him out onto the street immediately. Jada let out a low, deeply impressed chuckle, reaching over to buckle her seatbelt. The dashboard lights illuminated her fierce expression. "So what is our next move?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with the promise of absolute corporate warfare. I steered the car down the dark, tree-lined street, leaving Marcus and my treacherous family to enjoy their stolen turkey in blissful ignorance. "I am going to let them plan their stolen wedding," I said quietly, watching the massive estate disappear into the shadows of my rearview mirror. "I am going to let them think they won. And then we are going to take everything." The heavy manila folder sat practically glowing under the dining room chandelier, its bottom edge soaking up a pool of spilled turkey gravy. Marcus tapped his fingers against the mahogany table, an impatient rhythm that echoed in the suffocating silence of the room. He was waiting for a reaction. My mother was waiting for a reaction. Chloe was practically buzzing in her seat, her eyes wide with a hungry, desperate anticipation. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted me to shatter. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the strong, independent woman they had resented for so long finally break down into a sobbing, hysterical mess. I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead of raising my voice, I slowly reached for my crystal wine glass. The deep red Cabernet swirled gently as I lifted it to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine tasted rich and heavy, a sharp contrast to the cheap, shallow betrayal sitting across from me. I placed the glass back onto its silver coaster. I made sure it did not make a single sound. The total absence of my panic seemed to unnerve Marcus. His confident smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Come on, Maya." Marcus snapped, his tone laced with an irritating, forced sympathy. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the paper. I am giving you 30 days to figure out your living situation. That is more than generous considering the circumstances. Most guys would have your bags on the curb tonight." My mother leaned forward, her jewelry clinking against her plate. "He is being incredibly fair, Maya. Do not drag this out and ruin the holiday for the rest of us. Take the grace he is offering you." I shifted my gaze to my left hand. The 3-carat diamond engagement ring caught the ambient light, sparkling with a false promise of forever. It was a beautiful ring chosen to project wealth and status to Marcus's hedge fund buddies. I gripped the platinum band with my right hand and slid it smoothly off my finger. The skin underneath felt immediately lighter, as if a literal chain had been removed. I held the ring over the center of the breakup agreement. I let it drop. The heavy metal struck the paper with a sharp final clack that made Chloe jump slightly in her seat. "You want the house?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of a single ounce of sorrow. Marcus scoffed, crossing his arms over his tailored shirt. "It is my house, Maya. I pay the mortgage. You just live here." I reached for the expensive silver fountain pen resting beside my place card. I uncapped it with a smooth motion. I did not bother to read a single line of the document he had shoved in my face. I did not need to read his terms, because his terms meant absolutely nothing. I pressed the pen to the signature line at the very bottom of the page. I signed my name in bold, fluid strokes, pressing hard enough to leave a permanent indent on the mahogany table beneath the paper. I placed the cap back on the pen and pushed the entire folder ring included back across the gravy-stained tablecloth. "I wish you both exactly what you deserve," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with Marcus. The absolute lack of emotion in my voice finally wiped the smug look off his face. I pushed my heavy dining chair back and stood up. I did not look at the half-carved turkey. I did not look at the carefully curated side dishes I had spent 2 entire days preparing from scratch. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the formal dining room. Behind me, the tension in the room broke into an immediate chorus of scoffing and self-righteous whispers. "Oh, how typical," my mother sighed loudly, ensuring her voice carried down the hallway. "She always has to make a dramatic retreat. She could never just be happy for anyone else." "Let her go," Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with fake pity. "She is probably just embarrassed. By the way, Marcus, do you think we can keep the floral arrangements she booked for the reception? I really love those white orchids." I blocked out their voices as I reached the grand entryway. I opened the coat closet and pulled out my heavy wool trench coat. I slipped it over my shoulders, buttoning it with steady, methodical movements. I grabbed my car keys from the console table. I opened the massive oak front door and stepped out into the freezing November night. The sheer cold was a physical shock, instantly clearing the stifling perfume, heavy air of the dining room from my lungs. The driveway was illuminated by antique gas lamps, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I walked down the stone path toward my car. My mind was racing, calculating the exact legal timeline of what had just occurred, aligning the dominoes I was about to knock over. Just as I unlocked my car door and pulled the handle, the crunch of gravel echoed behind me. I turned to see a figure rushing out of the side door of the estate. It was Jada, my brother Julian's wife. She was practically sprinting down the driveway, her own coat hastily thrown over her shoulders. Jada was a senior forensic accountant at a top-tier firm, a woman whose entire career was built on finding the hidden truth in mountains of lies. She was also the only person in my family who possessed a shred of moral integrity. Jada reached my car, opened the passenger door, and slid into the leather seat. I got into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing us inside the quiet, insulated cabin. I turned the key in the ignition, letting the engine roar to life. The dashboard lights illuminated Jada's face. She was not offering me a shoulder to cry on. Instead, a brilliant predatory smirk was slowly spreading across her face. "They really have no idea, do they?" Jada asked, her voice vibrating with barely contained adrenaline. "They are sitting in there right now eating your turkey, drinking your wine, entirely clueless that you are the sole owner of the limited liability company that holds the legal deed to this entire multi-million-dollar property." I turned the heater on, letting the warm air blast into the freezing cabin. I looked at Jada, my secret weapon, my only real ally, and allowed myself to truly smile for the first time that evening. "They do not have a clue," I replied smoothly. "Marcus is so blinded by his own towering ego that he never once questioned the paperwork I put in front of him 2 years ago. He wanted to feel like the big man providing for his modest girlfriend. So I let him sign a shadow lease. I let him deposit his rent into an account I control. And tonight his arrogance just handed me the ultimate weapon." Jada let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head in pure disbelief. "When he slid that breakup agreement across the table and demanded you move out in 30 days, I almost choked on my wine. I shifted the car into gear, my hands gripping the steering wheel. That breakup agreement he just forced me to sign was the best Thanksgiving gift I could have ever asked for," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "By formally breaking his commitment to me and demanding I vacate the premises in writing, he inadvertently triggered the unconditional eviction clause buried in Section 4 of his shadow lease. He thought he was throwing me out, but legally, he just terminated his own tenancy without the right to appeal." Jada buckled her seatbelt, her eyes shining with the thrill of the impending destruction. "So what happens now, Maya? Do we call the police? Do we lock the doors?" I steered the car away from the curb, leaving the sprawling estate and my treacherous family behind in the darkness. "No," I said quietly, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my bones. "We wait. I am going to let them plan their extravagant wedding. I am going to let Marcus bleed his accounts dry trying to impress my parents. I am going to let Chloe try on my stolen wedding dress. And the second they feel like they have won the world, we are going to take everything from them." 3 days passed in a blur of calculated silent preparation. I did not retreat to a cheap motel to cry over my shattered relationship. Instead, Jada and I set up a war room in the penthouse suite of a downtown luxury hotel, a property that my holding company had acquired the previous fiscal quarter. We spent 72 hours poring over Marcus's financial disclosures, mapping out his assets, his over-leveraged investments, and his vulnerable credit lines. Jada's forensic accounting skills were terrifyingly efficient. She traced every penny Marcus had to his name, proving that his flashy lifestyle was built entirely on a foundation of high-interest debt and the shadow lease I had subsidized. On the morning of the third day, the trap received its first eager victim. My phone buzzed against the glass coffee table, disrupting the quiet hum of the suite. I picked it up to see a notification from Chloe. I opened the message, expecting a fake apology or perhaps a request for my house keys. Instead, what I read was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Maya, I know you are probably still sulking, but we need to be practical. Marcus and I are keeping your June wedding date, but all the premium vendors in the city are completely booked. Since you are obviously not getting married anymore, I need you to transfer your venue reservation, the custom dress designer in Paris, and the exclusive catering contract over to my name by noon today. Since you're not getting married, consider it your wedding gift to us. Do not make this difficult." I stared at the glowing screen, marveling at the utter lack of shame. Chloe was not just asking for my leftovers. She was demanding the elite million-dollar wedding experience I had quietly paid for in cash, completely unaware of the actual price tags attached to those premium contracts. Marcus had always assumed he was footing the bill because I let him transfer small, insignificant deposits while my accounts quietly covered the massive underlying guarantees. Before I could show the message to Jada, My phone vibrated violently in my hand again. An incoming call from my father, Richard. I swiped the green button and put the call on speakerphone, resting the device on the table so Jada could hear. Maya, my father barked, his voice carrying that familiar tone of absolute authority he reserved specifically for me. Chloe just told me you are ignoring her messages. I am calling to tell you to stop this childish tantrum immediately. I have not ignored anything, Richard, I replied smoothly. I received her message exactly 30 seconds ago. Then you know what needs to be done. He snapped back, his impatience flaring. Your sister needs those wedding vendors. Marcus is a very important man with a very important public image to maintain. He cannot be seen getting married in some second-rate banquet hall just because you want to be petty. You are going to call the estate venue, the caterer, and that dressmaker right now and transfer everything into Chloe's name. I leaned back against the plush sofa cushions, exchanging a knowing glance with Jada. You want me to hand over the wedding I spent a year planning? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. You are not using it, my father countered sharply. This is exactly what your mother meant when she said you were cold. You have always been selfish, Maya. When you were 10, you refused to give Chloe your brand new bicycle when she wrecked hers. When you were 16, you threw a fit when we asked you to empty your savings account to pay for her cheerleading camp. You always put yourself first. Well, I will not allow you to ruin your sister's happiness out of spite. I listened to his words, recognizing the lifelong pattern. Every single time Chloe broke her toys, I was expected to hand over mine. Now she had broken my engagement, and I was expected to hand over my wedding. And if I declined to transfer the contracts I asked, my father let out a harsh, mocking breath. If you refuse to do this one simple thing for your family, I will publicly disown you. I will make sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly how bitter and unhinged you have become. I will cut you out of this family forever. Don't be a bitter spinster, Maya. Hand over the contracts or do not ever bother calling us again. The threat of disownment hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a fraction of a second, the little girl inside me who had spent decades begging for her father's approval felt a familiar pang of rejection. But that little girl was gone, replaced by the woman who owned the very ground he walked on. He thought he was threatening me with exile. He did not realize he was just giving me permission to destroy them without an ounce of guilt. I will handle the transfers immediately, I said, my voice sweet and accommodating. See that you do. My father replied sharply, terminating the call without another word. Jada let out a low whistle, shaking her head as she looked at the silent phone. They really hate you, she stated, her forensic mind processing the sheer toxicity of the exchange. They love what they can take from me, I corrected, picking up the phone. But they are about to learn a very painful lesson about taking things they cannot afford. I opened my email application and navigated to the folder containing my wedding vendor contracts. The private coastal estate, the Michelin-starred catering team, the Parisian bridal house. I had secured these vendors through my corporate concierge service. The contracts were structured so that the initial deposits held the dates, but the final astronomical balances were due upon transfer, or exactly 30 days before the event. By forcing me to transfer the contracts to Chloe and Marcus, they were legally assuming the financial liability for a multi-million-dollar luxury wedding. Marcus's over-leveraged credit lines would snap like dry twigs the moment these vendors ran his financial profiles for the final guarantees. I forwarded the transfer authorization forms to my concierge team with specific instructions. They were to remove my limited liability company from all financial guarantees and transfer the entire financial burden directly to Marcus's personal accounts. Then I opened my text messages and navigated back to Chloe's incredibly entitled demand. I let my thumbs hover over the keyboard, savoring the absolute perfection of the trap she had just walked blindly into. I typed my response, feeling a cold, satisfying smile curve across my face. Of course, Chloe. The vendors are all yours. Of course, Chloe. The vendors are all yours. I hit the send button and tossed my phone onto the plush leather sofa. The tiny, digital swoosh confirming the message delivery sounded like the satisfying click of a loaded trap. Jada, who was sitting across from me at the glass dining table, surrounded by sprawling financial documents, looked up from her laptop screen. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. "You just gave them the wedding," Jada asked, her voice laced with heavy skepticism. "After everything they just did to you, after throwing you out of your own home on a holiday, you are simply handing over the most exclusive vendors in the entire state." "I am not handing them anything," I replied, walking over to the penthouse wet bar to pour myself a glass of sparkling water. "I am simply transferring the legal liability of those massive contracts into their names exactly as my father commanded." What Richard and Chloe fail to understand is the hidden reality of my business portfolio. I took a sip of the cold water and leaned against the cool marble counter. "I do not just own residential real estate, Jada. 2 years ago, my holding company aggressively expanded our market reach. I am the silent majority investor in the Vanguard Hospitality Group." Jada's eyes widened slightly as her brilliant forensic accounting brain immediately connected the dots. "Vanguard. They own the coastal cliffside estate you booked. They own the entire Michelin-starred catering syndicate that runs the eastern seaboard." "Exactly." I smiled, setting my glass down. Chloe thinks she is inheriting a fully paid for seamlessly planned fairy tale. Marcus thinks he is stepping into a luxury wedding that I somehow financed through my supposedly modest decorator salary. They assumed my initial deposits covered the bulk of the expenses. But because I own the parent company, those contracts were drafted under a primary investor profile. My friends and family discount was not a standard 10% reduction. It was a 100% waiver of all premium site fees, seasonal upcharges, and luxury tax brackets. I was paying the absolute raw minimum for wholesale ingredients and base staff wages. I picked up my phone again and navigated to my contacts. Let us see how much Marcus loves providing for my sister when he actually has to pay the retail price. I dialed the direct line for Eleanor, the Senior Operations Director for Vanguard Hospitality. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and fiercely professional. "Maya, it is wonderful to hear from you. How are the final preparations coming along for the big day?" "There has been a change of plans, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice bright and purely businesslike. "The wedding is still happening on the scheduled date, but I will no longer be the bride. My sister Chloe will be taking my place, and her new fiancé Marcus will be assuming all financial responsibilities for the event moving forward. I need you to execute a full contract transfer immediately." There was a brief, highly professional pause on the other end of the line. "I understand completely, Maya. I will prepare the transfer authorization forms right now. Shall I maintain the current billing profile and courtesies?" "Absolutely not," I instructed firmly. "I need you to formally remove my name, my corporate tax identification number, and my primary investor discount from all associated accounts. You are to revert every single line item for the venue, the catering and the staffing back to their maximum luxury retail pricing. I want the standard seasonal premium applied to the estate rental. I want the catering invoiced at the top tier rate for 300 guests. Apply the standard gratuity, the peak season surcharge, and the premium alcohol package costs." Eleanor, who was well aware of my family dynamics from managing previous corporate events, let out a soft, knowing breath. "Consider it done, Maya. The revised invoices will be generated and emailed to the new primary contact within the next 5 minutes." I gave her Marcus's personal email address and ended the call. Jada was already typing furiously on her laptop, pulling up the standard retail pricing sheets for Vanguard Hospitality properties and cross-referencing them with Marcus's financial disclosures. "Maya," Jada said, her voice dropping into a low register of pure astonishment, "the Cliffside Estate alone commands a base rental fee of $150,000 during the peak summer season. The catering tier you selected features imported Wagyu beef, rare caviar stations, and vintage champagne towers. At standard retail pricing for 300 guests, the food and beverage minimum is easily $200,000. Do not forget the dress," I reminded her, dialing my next contact. I called Madame Laurent, the fiercely protective Parisian bridal designer who had crafted my custom gown. My holding company had provided the critical seed funding to save her flagship boutique from bankruptcy 3 years ago. When I explained the situation and instructed her to transfer the fitting to Chloe, Madame Laurent was furious on my behalf. I told her to remove my investment waiver and charge Chloe the absolute maximum rush order retail price for the custom silk plus international fitting and shipping fees. Madame Laurent gladly agreed, promising to send an aggressively itemized invoice directly to Marcus. I ended the second call and sat down next to Jada. We watched the digital clock on her laptop screen tick forward 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I knew exactly what was happening across town at that very second. Marcus would be sitting in the home office of my house, the house he thought he was evicting me from. He would be nursing a glass of expensive bourbon, feeling incredibly victorious, soaking in my parents' lavish praise about his earning potential. His phone would chime with an incoming email, then another and another. He would open the message from Vanguard Hospitality Group, expecting to see a simple transfer receipt for a few $1,000s. Instead, he would scroll down to the final terrifying total. The venue fee, the catering minimums, the staffing surcharges, the Parisian designer invoices. All of it dropping onto his heavily leveraged credit lines at once. As if answering my exact thought, Jada's phone lit up on the table. It was a frantic text message from her husband Julian, who was still trapped at the Thanksgiving dinner. Jada picked up the phone, reading the message aloud, her voice trembling with suppressed laughter. Julian says Marcus just walked out of the office looking like he saw a ghost. He is completely pale. He is sweating through his tailored shirt. He just started screaming at Chloe that the wedding vendors sent him a revised bill and demanding to know why she changed the contracts behind his back. Jada looked up at me, her eyes wide with a thrilling, terrifying awe. Maya, Julian says Marcus is literally hyperventilating in the hallway. The automated invoices just hit his inbox. With the estate, the catering, and the custom dress, the wedding will now cost him over $500,000. I smiled, turning my gaze toward the glittering city skyline outside the penthouse window. He wanted the prestige of my life, I murmured, savoring the absolute financial ruin I had just unleashed. Now he gets to pay for it. Over the next 48 hours, the silence from my family's camp was deafening. There were no furious phone calls from my mother. There were no gloating text messages from Chloe. According to Julian, who was playing his role as the dutiful brother-in-law, with award-winning precision, Marcus had swallowed the $500,000 anvil whole. Julian reported that Marcus walked out of the home office, his face the color of wet ash, and simply told Chloe the premium wedding vendors were fully secured. He did not say a single word about the staggering price quadrupling. He completely omitted the fact that my massive VIP discount had evaporated into thin air. His towering, fragile ego simply could not handle the alternative. To admit to Chloe and my mother that he could not afford the very wedding he had just proudly demanded would be social suicide. My mother, Susan, was already boasting to her elite country club circle about Marcus's limitless wealth. She was posting daily updates about the Parisian dressmaker and the exclusive coastal estate, ensuring everyone in their zip code knew her golden child was marrying a Wall Street billionaire. Marcus was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, terrified that pulling the plug on the luxury vendors would expose him as a financial fraud. So he smiled, poured himself another glass of scotch, and pretended he could easily absorb a $500,000 hit. I knew better, and so did Jada. We met 5 days later at a discreet, dimly lit, artisanal coffee roaster tucked away in the financial district. The cafe was a favorite among corporate whistleblowers and off-the-clock executives, offering high-backed leather booths that swallowed conversations whole. I arrived early, ordering a black coffee and settling into a corner booth. Jada walked in 10 minutes later, clutching a sleek silver briefcase like it contained nuclear launch codes. She slid into the leather seat opposite me, her eyes gleaming with a predatory thrill that instantly told me she had found the kill shot. "You are going to want to buy my coffee for the next decade," Jada said, snapping her briefcase open and pulling out a slim tablet. "I have spent the last 4 nights running a deep dive on Marcus's hedge fund. You know I love untangling offshore accounts, Maya, but this guy made it almost too easy." I leaned forward, wrapping my hands around my warm mug. Tell me everything. Jada tapped the screen, bringing up a dizzying array of spreadsheets, wire transfer logs, and corporate filings. Marcus projects the image of a titan. She began, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. But his firm is an absolute house of cards. For the past 18 months, he has been bleeding capital. He made a series of catastrophic, highly leveraged trades in the tech sector right before the market corrected. He is drowning in margin calls. His liquid assets are virtually non-existent. I stared at the red numbers flashing across her screen, piecing the grim reality together. That is why he was so desperate to keep the house. I realized the truth finally snapping into focus. He needed a rent-free, multi-million-dollar asset to project stability to his remaining investors. If he lost the estate, his clients might start asking questions about his personal liquidity. Exactly. Jada confirmed, taking a quick sip of the water a waiter had just dropped off. He is cash poor, Maya. He is leveraged up to his eyeballs. Which brings us to the immediate problem of your $500,000 wedding trap. When Eleanor from Vanguard Hospitality sent those updated invoices, Marcus had exactly 48 hours to post the initial non-refundable deposits to secure the new contracts under his name. That was $150,000 in pure cash. Cash that his personal bank accounts absolutely did not have. I frowned looking at the dates on the spreadsheet, but Vanguard confirmed the deposits cleared yesterday morning. If his personal accounts are drained and his credit lines are maxed out, how did he clear $150,000 in 48 hours? Jada's smile widened, transforming from predatory to victorious. She swiped her finger across the tablet, bringing up a highly encrypted ledger that she had managed to mirror from a careless server vulnerability in Marcus's back office. He did not use his personal accounts, Jada said softly, tapping a specific highlighted wire transfer. Look at the routing numbers, Maya. I squinted at the digital trail. The transfer had originated from a corporate holding account, bounced through a shell company registered in Delaware, and then landed squarely in Vanguard Hospitality's payment portal. It was an elaborate maze designed to hide the origin of the cash. I do not understand, I murmured, tracing the digital path with my eyes. What account is this? That is a client escrow account, Jada stated, leaning back against the leather booth and letting the absolute gravity of her words settle between us. Marcus took $150,000 of his client's investment funds and quietly wired it to cover Chloe's wedding venue. The air in the coffee shop seemed to stop moving. I stared at Jada, waiting for the punchline, but her face remained entirely serious. He embezzled client funds, I asked, my voice barely a breath. He is actively embezzling as we speak, Jada corrected, her tone laced with absolute certainty. He probably rationalized it as a temporary float. He likely plans to replace the money as soon as one of his bad trades miraculously recovers. But we both know those trades are toxic. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and he is doing it to fund a luxury wedding just to keep your mother and sister fawning over him. It is a massive Securities and Exchange Commission violation. I looked back down at the screen. The digital trail was undeniable. Marcus was not just a cheating, arrogant narcissist anymore. He was a corporate criminal committing a massive felony. He was signing his own federal prison sentence just to avoid looking broke in front of Chloe. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The bitter taste grounded me, focusing the sheer magnitude of the weapon Jada had just handed me. My family thought they had broken me by taking my fiancé. They had no idea they had just hitched their entire social standing to a sinking ship, driven by a man actively stealing from wealthy investors. Print everything, I instructed Jada, my voice hardening into a blade of pure steel. Track every single penny he moves from those client accounts to the wedding vendors. Let him pay the caterer. Let him pay Madame Laurent for that custom silk dress. I want him in so deep he cannot possibly claw his way out. Jada closed the tablet, the soft click echoing like a gavel. And then what? And then I smiled. We are going to let him stand at the altar, surrounded by my family and all their country club friends, and we are going to burn his entire life to the ground. I watched the digital tracker Jada had installed mirror every frantic financial move Marcus made over the next 2 weeks. Embezzling $150,000 from his clients was only a temporary bandage on a severed artery. Chloe's appetite for luxury was a bottomless pit, and Marcus had foolishly handed her a shovel. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her Wall Street billionaire was suffocating under the weight of her demands. My mother made the situation infinitely worse. Susan posted daily updates about the wedding preparations on her social media, publicly praising Marcus for sparing no expense. Chloe, emboldened by the constant stream of attention, began adding utterly ridiculous upgrades to the event. She demanded custom-cut diamond tennis bracelets as thank you gifts for her 8 bridesmaids. She insisted on booking first-class flights to Dubai for an extravagant week-long bachelorette trip. She added a live 10-piece string quartet for the cocktail hour and mandated that rare white orchids be flown in directly from Holland to drape across the entire reception hall ceiling. Every single day, a new, staggering expense hit Marcus's inbox. Jada and I sat in our hotel suite, watching his financial vital signs flatline in real time. He desperately tried to open new lines of credit, only to be automatically rejected by every major bank in the city due to his catastrophic debt-to-income ratio. He could not embezzle another dime from his hedge fund clients without triggering an automatic, irreversible Securities and Exchange Commission audit. His legitimate options had completely evaporated. Marcus was a man obsessed with appearances. Admitting failure to Chloe and my father was simply not an option his fragile ego could process, so he turned to the shadows. Jada's surveillance algorithms flagged a series of encrypted messages and an unusual calendar appointment late on a Thursday evening. Marcus was scheduled to meet at a discreet members-only cigar lounge in the financial district. The man he was meeting was not a traditional banker or an accredited investor. His name was Silas, a private shadow lender, known for providing massive, untraceable cash infusions to desperate executives who had run out of legitimate runway. Silas operated with exorbitant predatory interest rates and required absolute ironclad collateral. I had my private security team quietly secure a booth near the back of the lounge, allowing Jada and me to access the room's internal audio feed through a strategic financial tip to the bartender. We listened in absolute silence as Marcus confidently walked into the trap of his own making. Marcus sat across from Silas, projecting the false bravado of a wealthy titan rather than a drowning fraud. He ordered a top-shelf scotch and smoothly asked for a short-term bridge loan of $800,000. He claimed it was a minor liquidity issue, a temporary cash flow holdup, due to some complex overseas investments that were currently tied up in regulatory tape. Silas did not care about Marcus's polished excuses or his tailored suit. The shadow lender's voice crackled through our audio feed, cold and deeply unimpressed. He demanded hard, tangible collateral. He wanted a physical asset worth at least $2 million to secure the high-risk loan, and he wanted the deed free and clear of any primary bank mortgages. This was the moment Marcus was supposed to walk away. This was the moment any rational human being would realize the charade was over, call off the extravagant wedding, and confess to being entirely broke. Instead, Marcus leaned forward and confidently offered up my estate. I own a sprawling multi-million-dollar property in the most exclusive zip code in the city. Marcus declared, his voice dripping with arrogant certainty. It is fully furnished, impeccably maintained, and conservatively appraised at $4.5 million. I will put the deed up as collateral. You can hold the lien against the house. I will have the loan repaid with your premium interest within 90 days. Jada stared at me from across our hotel suite, her jaw literally dropping. He is pledging your house, she whispered, utterly astounded by the sheer magnitude of his delusion. He genuinely thinks it is his house, I replied, my voice a quiet, venomous purr. He pays the monthly maintenance fee to my holding company. His name is on the municipal utility bills and the neighborhood association registry. Because I let him play the role of the big provider for 2 years, his towering narcissism has convinced him that he is the actual legal title holder. Silas, satisfied with the valuation of the property and the prestigious address, slid a thick stack of legal documents across the cigar lounge table. We listened as the heavy scratch of a fountain pen echoed through the audio feed. Marcus did not hesitate. He did not ask to take the documents home to have his own lawyers review the paperwork. Blinded by desperation and his absolute need to keep Chloe dripping in diamonds, he signed his name on every single dotted line. He officially pledged a multi-million-dollar property he did not own to a dangerous shadow lender to secure $800,000 in illicit cash. By placing his signature on that collateral agreement, Marcus crossed an invisible point of no-return threshold. Embezzling client funds was a massive corporate crime, but what he had just done in that cigar lounge was far more destructive. He had just committed federal wire fraud and first-degree mortgage fraud. 20 minutes later, my phone illuminated on the glass table. It was a high-priority alert from the lead corporate attorney at my primary holding company. The message was brief, urgent, and perfectly timed. Maya, an unauthorized party, has just attempted to file a commercial lien against the primary estate deed. Please advise on how to proceed. I looked at the notification, feeling a rush of absolute thrilling power surge through my veins. Marcus had just handed me the match to ignite his entire existence. Do we block the lien? Jada asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, ready to deploy our legal defense and shut Marcus down immediately. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. Absolutely not, I replied. Let the lien process. Let him take the shadow money and spend every last stolen dime of it on Chloe's wedding. I want the financial noose tied so tightly around his neck that he cannot even breathe. We are going to let them all walk into that reception hall, thinking they have conquered the world, and then we are going to drop the floor right out from under them. We are going to let them all walk into that reception hall, thinking they have conquered the world, and then we are going to drop the floor right out from under them. It did not take long for the cracks in Marcus's shiny facade to splinter further. The $800,000 shadow loan from Silas was a massive infusion of cash, but it was like pouring a single glass of water into a vast, scorching desert. Chloe's extravagant demands were relentless and entirely detached from reality. She had absolutely no concept of a budget, because Marcus had spent 2 entire years aggressively convincing her he possessed limitless wealth. Now he was trapped, playing the role he had created for himself. He paid the coastal estate venue. He paid the Parisian dressmaker. He paid the initial catering minimums to Vanguard Hospitality. But then came the final staggering bill for the floral design and the custom reception decor. The rare white orchids flown in directly from Holland, the custom lighting rigs, the imported crystal table centerpieces, and the velvet drapery required a flat $100,000 due immediately to secure the international shipment. Silas's loan money was already entirely gone, swallowed whole by the luxury vendors and the immediate predatory interest installments Marcus was forced to pay just to keep his physical kneecaps intact. Marcus had tapped out his embezzled client funds. He had tapped out his dangerous shadow lender. His legitimate credit lines were non-existent, blocked by his catastrophic debt-to-income ratio. He was facing a hard, unforgiving wall of financial reality. But a seasoned con artist never stops running the con. They simply pivot and look for an easier mark. And there were no easier marks in the world than my parents. Richard and Susan were so blinded by the glaring prestige of Wall Street that they would happily jump off a financial cliff if they thought a billionaire was waiting at the bottom to catch them. According to the meticulous digital tracking Jada maintained on Marcus's communication logs, he invited Richard and Susan to a private dinner at an exclusive dimly lit steakhouse. He wore his finest bespoke suit, ordered the most expensive bottle of vintage Cabernet on the menu, and fed them a masterful tragic story about a temporary cash flow delay. He claimed a massive overseas tech acquisition was temporarily frozen by strict international regulators, leaving his liquid capital tied up for a mere 30 days. He acted embarrassed, devastated, even that he might have to ask his beloved Chloe to compromise on her dream floral arrangements. He played my parents perfectly, plucking effortlessly at their deep social insecurities and their desperate need to project absolute perfection to their country club peers. My parents, terrified that their golden daughter might suffer the supreme indignity of standard local roses, instead of imported exotic orchids, leaped at the chance to play the wealthy heroes. I learned the full agonizing details of this transaction 3 days later when my cell phone rang. I was sitting at my office desk reviewing the latest quarterly projections for my holding company when my mother's name flashed on the caller identification screen. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear, fully expecting another petty demand or perhaps a joyful update on how much happier Chloe was without me around to ruin the mood. "Maya, my mother." Susan purred into the receiver. Her voice was thick with that distinct, syrupy condescension she always utilized when she felt she had secured a vital victory over me. "I am just calling to finalize the reception headcount. Since you are obviously not attending, we are moving the governor's chief of staff to your old seat." "That sounds perfectly practical, Mother," I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am glad you found a suitable replacement." "Oh, we found a replacement for everything, Maya." She continued, the smugness practically radiating through the speaker. "In fact, I am calling to give you a piece of advice. You could really learn something from Marcus. He is dealing with a minor international cash flow delay right now because his portfolio is just so incredibly massive and complex. It is the kind of high-level financial maneuvering you simply would not understand with your little decorating jobs." "A temporary cash flow delay," I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly neutral to ensure she kept talking. "Yes, exactly. And because your father and I actually believe in supporting family, unlike you, we stepped up to the plate. Marcus needed a quick $100,000 to secure Chloe's floral shipment from Holland. So your father and I happily cashed out our primary 401k retirement accounts to cover it." I froze. My hand tightened around the leather armrest of my desk chair. "You liquidated your retirement accounts. You took the early withdrawal penalty and the massive tax hit just to buy flowers." "It is an investment." Maya, my mother, snapped, instantly annoyed by my lack of enthusiastic praise for their financial sacrifice. "Your father marched right down to his wealth manager and signed the dispersal forms this morning. The manager tried to warn us about early withdrawal penalties and capital gains taxes, but Richard told him a true visionary knows when to leverage assets. Marcus is going to roll that $100,000 directly into his elite hedge fund the second his overseas capital frees up next month. He is going to double our retirement savings in 6 weeks as a thank you. He is a financial genius. You should really take notes on how a real man provides for the people he loves, instead of hiding your money and being a bitter spinster." I sat in my quiet office, letting her words echo in the space between us. She was so incredibly proud of herself. She genuinely believed she had just secured her financial future by bailing out a billionaire. "That is certainly a bold investment strategy, Mother," I said smoothly. "I sincerely hope it yields the exact returns you deserve." I terminated the call and slowly lowered the phone to my desk. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt a chilling absolute zero settle over my entire body. My parents had just handed over 40 years of their hard-earned life savings to a desperate, drowning man. They had liquidated their entire future and wired it directly into the accounts of an active federal criminal. They thought they were investing in a Wall Street titan. They thought they were securing their golden years. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed their life savings to an embezzler who was one audit away from a federal indictment. I picked up my silver pen and tapped it against my mahogany desk. Marcus had taken my ring, my sister, and my father's respect. Now he had taken my parents' entire financial future. The trap was fully set, the bait was swallowed, and the countdown to the wedding day had officially begun. The rest of the week passed with a deceptive quiet calm. I focused entirely on my Vanguard hospitality portfolio, signing off on new acquisitions, while Jada monitored the digital bleed of Marcus's stolen funds. He was hemorrhaging the money he took from my parents, wiring it in frantic bursts to florists, event riggers, and luxury rental services. Every single dollar was a nail in his eventual coffin. Then on Tuesday morning, an email pinged into my personal inbox. It was not from my mother, and it was not a frantic vendor. It was from Marcus. I clicked open the message expecting another legal threat or perhaps a demand for me to formally surrender my remaining furniture. Instead, I found a masterclass in petty arrogant entitlement. Maya. The email began devoid of any pleasantries or basic manners. Chloe is extremely distressed. Every day, the postal carrier drops off a thick stack of utility bills, neighborhood association notices, and property tax assessments addressed entirely to you. She finds it incredibly disrespectful and triggering to see your name stamped across the mail entering her new home. It is a constant, unwelcome reminder of the past. Since I am now financing the entirety of this household and preparing for our wedding, I need you to contact the water, electricity, and gas providers immediately. Transfer the billing profiles into my name. Chloe is the lady of the house now. Remove yourself. I read the email twice, letting the sheer unadulterated audacity wash over me. Chloe was living in my multi-million-dollar estate, sleeping in my custom-designed bedroom, and planning a luxury wedding financed by embezzled funds and my parents' stolen retirement, yet her biggest daily crisis was seeing my name printed on a paper envelope. She wanted the absolute uninterrupted fantasy. She wanted to erase my existence completely. Marcus, desperate to play the role of the almighty protector, was indulging this ridiculous tantrum without understanding the fundamental mechanics of how a luxury estate actually functioned. He assumed transferring a utility bill was as simple as changing a streaming service password. He had absolutely no idea that the utilities for a property of that magnitude were not standard residential accounts. Running the climate control, the heated infinity pool, the automated security gates, and the massive server racks cost upwards of $10,000 a month. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. He wanted my name off the accounts. I was more than happy to oblige. I picked up my phone and dialed the priority commercial line for the Regional Power Authority. Because the estate was held under my private limited liability company, I was assigned a dedicated corporate account manager. A woman named Sarah answered almost immediately, her tone crisp and accommodating. "Good morning, Miss Wilson," Sarah said. "How can I assist you with the estate profile today?" "Good morning, Sarah," I replied, keeping my voice bright and strictly professional. "I need to make an immediate administrative change to the property located on Coastal Ridge Drive. I have a tenant currently occupying the residence who has requested that my name and my corporate entity be completely removed from all billing and service accounts." There was a brief pause accompanied by the clatter of keyboard strokes as Sarah pulled up the massive file. "I can certainly process administrative changes, Miss Wilson, but I need to clarify the legal parameters. The power grids, the backup generators, and the climate control systems for a property of this size draw a massive commercial-grade load. The accounts are directly anchored to the property deed and your corporate tax identification number. I cannot simply swap the primary contact to a tenant's name, especially if they are not the legal property owner." "I understand completely," I said, tapping my silver pen against the desk. "What is the protocol for removing my name to satisfy the tenant's request?" Sarah let out a small, sympathetic sigh. "The only way to completely remove your name and sever your financial liability from the estate's power grid is to formally close the account. We would have to terminate the current service agreement entirely. The new occupant would then have to apply for a brand new commercial account, undergo a deep forensic credit check, and pay the mandatory high-risk security deposits before we could restore the grid." "And how long does it take to process an account termination?" I asked, my smile widening into a predatory grin. "Since you are a priority commercial client, we can execute the shutoff remotely." And immediately Sarah confirmed. The grid would go dark within the hour. I felt a thrill of pure vindictive joy shoot straight down my spine. Marcus wanted to act like the absolute master of the domain. Chloe wanted to play the lady of the house. It was time they learned exactly how the real world operated when they were no longer insulated by my money. "Execute the termination." "Sarah," I instructed firmly. "Close the account immediately." "I will process that right now, Miss Wilson. The main breakers will be deactivated shortly." I ended the call and immediately dialed the Municipal Water Authority. I went through the exact same conversation with their commercial division. The estate required massive water pressure for the sprawling irrigation systems, the infinity pool filtration, and the multi-zone luxury bathrooms. Just like the power grid, the water account was anchored directly to my LLC. The only way to remove my name was to sever the main line connection. I authorized the immediate shutoff without a single second of hesitation. I did not stop there. I methodically moved down my list. I canceled the high-speed fiber optic internet. I terminated the massive gas lines that fueled the imported European stove and the outdoor fire pits. I even canceled the weekly private trash collection and the landscaping service. I systematically dismantled the invisible infrastructure that kept their luxurious stolen fantasy alive. I hung up the phone and looked at the digital clock on my computer screen. It was 2 in the afternoon. The bright afternoon sun would be streaming through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate, temporarily masking the reality of what I had just done. But the house was already dying around them. I imagined the exact sequence of events. The smart refrigerator in the kitchen would suddenly power down the digital screen, going black. The automated security gates at the end of the driveway would lock down completely dead on their tracks. The climate-controlled wine cellar holding Marcus's expensive collection would immediately begin to lose its temperature. Chloe would probably be lounging by the pool trying to upload a gloating selfie about her diamond bracelets, only to find the Wi-Fi completely dead. She would march into the house to complain to Marcus, only to find the air conditioning had stopped humming. And when the evening chill rolled in off the coast, she would try to adjust the thermostat angrily, jabbing her manicured fingers against a blank, lifeless screen. When they tried to turn on the gold-plated faucets, they would get nothing but a pathetic, sputtering hiss of empty pipes. Marcus had demanded I remove myself from the house. I had complied with absolute malicious precision. I had severed the arteries of the estate, cutting off the power, the water, the gas, and the connectivity. I had authorized the immediate shutoff of all utilities to the estate, plunging their stolen fairy tales straight into the dark ages. The timing of the utility termination was not a random administrative decision. I had coordinated the shutoff to execute precisely at 8 in the evening on a Saturday. This was not just any Saturday. Chloe and Marcus were hosting an incredibly lavish, highly publicized engagement party at my estate. They had invited over 100 guests, including the remaining wealthy clients from Marcus's hedge fund, the same clients whose accounts he had just systematically looted. My mother had spent the entire week calling her country club friends, assuring them this would be the social event of the season. Through the audio surveillance Jada had successfully embedded in Marcus's mobile device, we had front-row seats to the entire spectacle. I sat in our hotel suite listening to the ambient noise of clinking crystal champagne flutes and the soft, elegant melodies of a live string quartet. I could hear Chloe's high-pitched laughter echoing through the grand foyer. I could hear my mother loudly boasting to a group of investors about the imported caviar and the breathtaking ocean views. It was a symphony of stolen privilege entirely funded by fraud, delusion, and my own bank accounts. Then the main event began. Marcus tapped a silver spoon against his glass, calling the sprawling room to attention. He cleared his throat, his voice dripping with that familiar, sickening arrogance. He began a grandiose toast, welcoming the elite crowd to what he repeatedly called his home. He spoke about his boundless love for Chloe, his incredible success on Wall Street, and his bright, limitless future. He raised his glass to the ceiling, preparing to deliver his final triumphant punchline. Right at that exact second, the digital clock on Jada's laptop hit 8. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. Through the audio feed, the sudden absence of sound was deafening. The heavy, comforting hum of the estate's massive central air conditioning units died immediately. The ambient lighting systems, the crystal chandeliers, and the outdoor pool illuminations vanished in a fraction of a second. The string quartet stumbled to a discordant screeching halt. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room, followed almost immediately by a chorus of confused gasps. Then the secondary reality of the shutoff hit. A woman's voice, sharp and panicked, echoed from the hallway near the guest powder rooms. "The toilets are not flushing," she yelled, her voice laced with aristocratic disgust. "There is absolutely no water coming out of the sinks." The pristine, carefully curated illusion shattered instantly. Chloe began screeching in the darkness, her voice bordering on absolute hysteria, demanding to know why her perfect party had been plunged into a medieval nightmare. I could hear my mother frantically trying to placate the wealthy investors, assuring them it was merely a temporary glitch in the wealthy neighborhood's grid. But the investors were not amused. Billionaires do not tolerate standing in the dark, sweating in a suddenly unventilated room, unable to even wash their hands. Marcus, his voice tight with suppressed panic, loudly announced that he was handling the situation. We listened through the feed as his heavy footsteps moved rapidly down the hall, slamming the heavy wooden door of the home office behind him. He immediately dialed the emergency line for the Regional Power Authority. When the dispatch operator answered, Marcus abandoned his smooth Wall Street persona entirely. He launched into a furious, demanding tirade. He identified himself as the master of the estate, screaming that he was hosting highly influential people and demanding that a repair crew be dispatched by helicopter if necessary to restore his power. The operator remained perfectly composed. "Sir," the operator stated, her voice crisp and echoing clearly through our speakers. "There is no malfunction on our end. Your service was not interrupted by a grid failure. The account was formally terminated and closed by the legal property owner less than an hour ago." Marcus stopped breathing. The silence from his end of the phone was absolute. "I am the owner," he finally snarled, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. "I pay the neighborhood association fees. I live here. Turn the lights back on immediately before I sue your entire department into bankruptcy." "I am looking at the legal deed right now, sir," the operator countered, entirely unfazed by his threats. "Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the corporate limited liability paperwork. You have no legal authority over this property. We cannot restore service without the direct authorization of the verified owner. If you have a dispute with your landlord, I suggest you take it up with them. Have a good evening." The line went dead. Marcus let out a guttural, terrifying sound of pure rage. He finally understood the reality of his situation. He was not a titan. He was not a homeowner. He was a squatter living in a house I controlled, and I had just publicly humiliated him in front of his most important clients. But Marcus could not walk back into that dark, sweltering living room and admit to Chloe that he was powerless. He could not confess to his investors that he had no legal right to the very ground they were standing on. Desperation breeds catastrophic decisions. Through the phone's microphone, we heard Marcus rush out the back door of the estate and sprint down the long driveway toward the main service road. The city utility technician was just finishing sealing the physical meter box by the security gates. Marcus did not hesitate. He intercepted the technician, his voice frantic and breathless. He pulled out a massive stack of physical cash, likely the remaining scraps from his disastrous shadow loan. He shoved $5,000 directly into the technician's hands, begging him to rip the municipal lock off the box and bypass the main digital meter. The technician warned him that tampering with a locked municipal utility box was a severe federal offense. It was a direct violation of municipal code and constituted felony utility theft. Marcus, blinded by his own fragile ego and the terror of facing his angry guests, told the man he did not care about the law. He promised double the cash if the lights came back on in 5 minutes. The corrupt technician pocketed the money. We heard the sharp crack of heavy bolt cutters snapping the municipal lock, followed by the heavy metallic grinding of the physical bypass switch being thrown. Instantly, the ambient hum of the estate's power grid roared back to life. Marcus let out a massive sigh of relief, jogging back up the driveway to his stolen mansion. He walked back into the living room, smoothing his expensive jacket and projecting a brilliant, entirely fake smile. "Just a simple city grid error, everyone," Marcus announced loudly, his voice echoing over the renewed chatter of the guests. "I just made a quick call to the regional director. They had a specialized crew out here instantly to fix the transformer. The perks of having the right connections in this city. Let us get back to the champagne." Chloe squealed with delight, loudly praising her brilliant, powerful fiancé for saving the night. My mother chimed in, practically swooning over how capable and commanding Marcus was in a crisis. Back in our hotel room, Jada slowly took her headphones off, staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer terror. "He just bypassed a municipal utility meter," Jada whispered, her hands flying across her keyboard to isolate and encrypt the audio file. He just physically tampered with city infrastructure. That is a massive felony, Maya. He could face 5 years in federal prison just for that alone. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands, my smile cold and perfectly content. He thought he was saving his engagement party, I replied softly, but all he really did was hand us the final nail for his coffin. It took Jada exactly 72 hours to excavate the darkest depths of Marcus's financial graveyard. We relocated our base of operations from the anonymous hotel suite to my actual domain. For 2 years, Marcus and my family believed I was a mid-level decorator scraping by on modest commissions. They had never seen the executive floor of the Vanguard Hospitality Group headquarters. My private corporate suite was a fortress of glass-brushed steel and quiet absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic commanding view of the city skyline, a stark contrast to the modest suburban life I had allowed Marcus to believe I desired. I sat behind a massive slab of polished walnut, watching Jada finalize the most destructive document either of us had ever compiled. She sat across from me, her eyes red-rimmed from consecutive nights of relentless code-breaking, but burning with a fierce, unmistakable intensity. She spun her monitor around to face me. The spreadsheets were no longer just tracking the immediate panicked wire transfers for Chloe's wedding vendors. They mapped a sprawling, systemic network of absolute depravity. The $150,000 he took for the Vanguard estate deposit was just a desperate, sloppy surface. Grab, Jada explained, her voice sharp and brutally clinical. When I dug into the foundational routing numbers of his primary hedge fund, I found the real rot. Marcus is not just losing money on bad tech bets, Maya. He has been actively looting his most vulnerable clients for years. I looked at the highlighted names on the screen, reading through the portfolio profiles. They were not aggressive venture capitalists or institutional investors. He targeted senior citizens, Jada stated, her tone laced with absolute disgust. He siphoned off $5 million over the past 3 years. He systematically drained the retirement fund's pension accounts and life savings of elderly clients who trusted him to secure their final years. He moved the money through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies to fund his lavish lifestyle, his designer suits, his luxury sports cars, and the very illusion of infinite wealth that had attracted your sister in the first place. He is bleeding the elderly dry so Chloe can sip vintage champagne and demand custom diamonds. I stared at the highly encrypted dossier Jada had compiled. The sheer scale of his criminality was breathtaking. He was not merely an arrogant, cheating opportunist. He was a predator. My parents had just handed their own 40-year retirement savings to a man who specialized in robbing the elderly. The poetic justice of my parents' financial ruin was almost too perfect, but the reality of his actual victims required immediate catastrophic action. Jada had organized the evidence into a pristine, undeniably lethal package. It contained the offshore wire transfer logs, the shell company registries, the false yield reports he mailed to the senior citizens to hide their dwindling balances, and the audio file of him bribing the municipal utility worker at the estate. It was a guaranteed federal indictment wrapped in a digital bow. "Are we ready?" Jada asked, her finger hovering over the trackpad. She had already established secure encrypted communication channels with the elite whistleblower divisions of both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I looked out at the city skyline, thinking about the absolute arrogance on Marcus's face the day he kicked me out of my own home. I thought about Chloe's smug, triumphant smile. I thought about my mother calling me a bitter failure. "Send it!" I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the executive suite. Jada tapped the key. A small loading bar appeared on the screen, moving rapidly before instantly flashing a brilliant green. The massive data file was transmitted directly to federal authorities. The room fell utterly silent. There was no going back now. The match had been struck and thrown directly into the center of the powder keg. The digital intake systems at the SEC flag high-priority, heavily documented embezzlement claims immediately, Jada stated, leaning back and rubbing her tired eyes. Especially when the victims involve senior citizens. The federal government does not ignore a neatly packaged $5 million fraud case involving elder abuse. but the wheels of justice move at their own precise, methodical pace. I stood up and walked over to the window, watching the traffic crawl far below. How long do we have until they move on him? For a case handed to them on a silver platter like this, they will mobilize incredibly fast, Jada replied, closing her laptop with a sharp snap. They will need to assign lead agents, verify the offshore routing numbers, and get a federal judge to sign off on the search and arrest warrants. They will want to strike before he realizes there is a leak and attempts to flee the jurisdiction or destroy the physical servers in his office. We are looking at 48 to 72 hours maximum. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the calendar application. I looked at the dates, feeling a rush of pure, unadulterated anticipation wash over me. The timing was an absolute masterpiece of divine retribution. In exactly 72 hours, Marcus and Chloe were scheduled to host their lavish wedding rehearsal dinner at an elite private country club. My entire family would be there in their finest formal wear. My mother would be holding court, bragging to her wealthy friends about the Wall Street titan joining their family. My father would be preparing to deliver a tearful, proud toast to his golden daughter. Marcus would be standing at the center of the room, basking in the adoration, surrounded by the elite, high society he had sacrificed everything and everyone to infiltrate. They were currently completely oblivious. Chloe was probably spending her morning agonizing over the exact shade of ivory for the personalized silk dinner napkins. My mother was likely on the phone with the country club manager, ensuring the imported caviar was kept at the precise optimal temperature for the rehearsal guests. Marcus was desperately trying to keep the lights on at his fraudulent firm, pretending the walls were not rapidly closing in on him. They were dancing happily on the edge of a massive cliff, entirely blind to the federal machinery that had just locked onto their exact coordinates. The clock was officially ticking. In 3 days, the federal agents would have their warrants in hand, and I fully intended to be standing right there in the room when they arrived to collect the groom. The 72-hour countdown was officially underway, but Marcus was already feeling the invisible noose tightening around his neck. Even without knowing about the federal warrants silently making their way across a judge's desk, Marcus was facing an immediate crushing crisis. His aggressive margin calls were coming due. The massive brokerage firms that had extended him leverage were demanding liquid cash to cover his catastrophic trading losses. The stolen funds from my parents had temporarily appeased his underground shadow lenders, but the legitimate financial institutions were now knocking at his door. He was entirely out of capital, out of credit, and rapidly running out of time. A cornered animal is incredibly dangerous, but a cornered con artist is remarkably predictable. Marcus needed to secure a permanent, legally binding tether to his primary marks before his entire facade collapsed. Jada and I sat in my corporate suite listening to the live audio feed intercepting Marcus's phone calls. The sheer manipulation we witnessed was breathtaking. Marcus called Chloe into my stolen home office and launched into a masterful, panicked performance disguised as elite financial strategy. He fed her a dense, incomprehensible script packed with Wall Street buzzwords. He talked about quarterly capital gains distributions, impending corporate tax audits, and the absolute necessity of shielding their combined assets from federal tax liabilities. Then he delivered his ultimate pitch. He told Chloe they needed to go to the downtown municipal courthouse and sign their legal marriage documents that very afternoon, a full week before the actual wedding ceremony. Initially, Chloe whined in protest. We heard her petulant voice echoing through the speakers, complaining that signing papers in a drab government building ruined the romance of her upcoming luxury event. She wanted the Parisian dress, the imported orchids, and the dramatic country club backdrop to be the exact moment she officially became a wife. But Marcus knew exactly how to play her. He lowered his voice into a soothing, conspiratorial tone. He told her that billionaires never leave their wealth unprotected for the sake of sentimentality. He framed the courthouse trip as an exclusive high society secret, a sophisticated financial maneuver that only the ultra-wealthy understood. He spun a narrative where signing the legal documents early would activate immediate spousal privilege and lock in a massive tax shelter for their non-existent fortune. He even threw in a subtle manipulative jab, suggesting that if she did not sign the papers today, the government might seize the funds meant for their extravagant honeymoon in the Maldives. Chloe swallowed the bait instantly. The prospect of participating in an elite billionaire tax loophole completely overrode her desire for traditional romance. She practically sprinted to get dressed. Marcus had one more vital step to execute. He needed witnesses, and he needed to ensure my parents were fully committed to the illusion. He called Richard and Susan, inviting them to the courthouse to witness what he called a brilliant, proactive wealth preservation strategy. My parents, entirely blinded by their own greed and social climbing ambitions, did not hesitate. They leaped at the opportunity to be included in Marcus's elite financial circle. I learned the agonizing details of this outing 2 hours later when my office phone rang. It was my mother. I answered the call, pressing the receiver to my ear, anticipating another round of petty insults. Instead, Susan was practically breathless with excitement. "Maya," she announced, her voice vibrating with absolute triumph. "I am calling to tell you that your sister is officially a married woman. We just left the courthouse." I kept my voice perfectly flat, masking the sudden shock. "The wedding is not until next week, Mother. Why would you rush to a municipal courthouse?" Susan let out a loud, condescending laugh. "This is exactly why you will never reach Marcus's level of success, Maya. You simply do not comprehend high-level asset management. Marcus is facing a massive, incredibly complex quarterly tax assessment on his hedge fund profits. He explained that by legally marrying Chloe today, he activates a spousal tax shelter that protects millions of dollars. It was a brilliant, proactive move. Your father and I proudly signed as the legal witnesses. Richard is absolutely thrilled. He told Marcus that this is the kind of aggressive, brilliant financial mind he always wanted in a son-in-law. I sat perfectly still, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. My parents had stood in a government building and enthusiastically watched their favorite daughter legally bind herself to a federal criminal. They had applauded the man who was actively draining their life savings. "Are you telling me," I asked slowly, ensuring I had the exact facts, "that Chloe and Marcus signed the marriage certificate today without executing a prenuptial agreement?" "A prenuptial agreement?" My mother gasped, deeply offended by the very concept. "Marcus told us that a prenuptial agreement is an insult to true love. He refused to even consider it. He wants Chloe to be an equal partner in everything he owns. He is completely transparent and generous with his wealth. You are just bitter because your own romantic life is a complete void. Chloe is now legally entitled to half of a Wall Street empire. You should be congratulating her instead of looking for flaws." "I will certainly offer Chloe exactly what she deserves," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "I hope her new legal status brings her everything she bargained for." I terminated the connection and gently placed the phone back on my desk. Jada looked up from her encrypted monitors, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did they really just sign the marriage certificate?" she asked, her voice hushed. "They signed it without a prenuptial agreement," I confirmed. "My mother just boasted about it." Jada let out a low whistle, shaking her head. "Marcus is a drowning man grabbing onto an anchor. By signing that certificate without a protective legal barrier, Chloe just merged her entire financial and legal identity with his. She is now legally tied to his debts, his civil liabilities, and the impending financial fallout of his collapsed hedge fund." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. Marcus had played his final card. He had convinced Chloe to bypass the safety net of a prenuptial agreement under the guise of romantic devotion. In reality, he had just ensured that when the federal government seized his non-existent assets and his creditors came hunting for their stolen millions, Chloe would be standing right in the crosshairs alongside him. My sister had spent her entire life demanding the spotlight and chasing the illusion of unearned wealth. She had just unknowingly shackled herself to a massive, toxic crater of fraudulent debt. The ink on their legal marriage certificate was barely dry, and the federal warrants were already being drafted. The trap was permanently sealed. Chloe had just made the most fatal mistake of her life, and the countdown to the rehearsal dinner had just become a countdown to complete, unavoidable destruction. 72 hours evaporated into a blur of meticulous preparation and absolute silence on my end. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it the crisp, cool air of the coast and the arrival of Marcus's stolen triumph. We parked my sleek black sedan just outside the perimeter of the estate's main gates. From our vantage point on the ridge, the property looked like a glowing jewel against the dark horizon. Marcus had spared absolutely no expense utilizing the last agonizing drops of his rapidly vanishing credit to fund his ultimate illusion. Valets in crisp white jackets jogged up and down the winding driveway, carefully parking a massive fleet of imported luxury vehicles. Bentleys, Maybachs, and custom Porsches lined the manicured lawns. Through the massive glass walls of the main reception hall, I could see the glow of hundreds of floating candles reflecting off the infinity pool. The faint, elegant melodies of a live string quartet drifted over the tall privacy hedges. It was a masterpiece of high society pageantry. It was also an active crime scene. Jada sat in the passenger seat beside me, tapping her manicured nails against her leather clutch. She wore a sharp, tailored crimson suit that practically radiated authority. I had opted for an emerald green silk gown, an incredibly rare vintage piece with sharp architectural lines that Marcus had once mocked as far too understated for his flashy tastes. Tonight it felt like battle armor. We sat in the quiet car and watched as catering staff circulated the grounds with silver trays of champagne and imported hors d'oeuvres. The guest list was a perfectly curated blend of the city's financial elite mixed seamlessly with my mother's pretentious country club circle. They were all standing on my property, drinking my stolen funds and toasting to a man who was mere hours away from a catastrophic federal indictment. "Let us go claim our invitations," I said, shifting the car into gear. We bypassed the busy valet line entirely. I drove straight up the secondary service access road to the private owner's entrance, a secure access point that Marcus did not even know existed because he had never bothered to read the actual architectural blueprints of the estate he claimed to own. We stepped out into the cool evening air. I did not sneak around the back garden or slip through the catering kitchen like an unwanted guest. I walked directly around to the front of the house, my heels clicking sharply against the imported paving stones, and marched straight through the massive double mahogany front doors. The grand foyer was packed with laughing, drinking elites. To my left, my father was holding a heavy crystal glass of scotch, loudly regaling a group of elderly investors with a completely fabricated story about Marcus's unparalleled business acumen and his brilliant tax strategies. Near the grand staircase, my mother was holding court. She was practically dripping in new diamonds, accepting breathless compliments on her flawless, beautiful daughter, and soaking up the jealous admiration of her peers. The moment I stepped fully into the light of the entryway, the atmosphere fractured. A ripple of absolute silence began at the front door and spread rapidly through the cavernous room like a physical shockwave. The arrogant conversations died mid-sentence. The polite, wealthy laughter choked to a sudden halt. Even the string quartet, sensing the immediate suffocating shift in the room's energy, faltered on their strings and stopped playing entirely. A sea of incredibly wealthy, highly influential faces turned to stare at the woman they had all been explicitly told was a bitter, jealous failure who could not handle her sister's success. I stood perfectly still, my posture completely straight, letting my gaze sweep over the crowd with chilling, absolute authority. Jada stood right beside me, holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio perfectly flat against her chest. Inside that portfolio was the forensic evidence detailing the financial ruin of almost every single investor currently standing in this room. Whispers began to break out like hissing steam. I could see the confusion rippling across the faces of my parents' friends. My mother turned her wine glass, freezing halfway to her mouth. The smug, triumphant glow immediately drained from Susan's face, replaced by a mask of absolute, undisguised horror. My father lowered his scotch, his jaw actually dropping open as he stared at me, standing in the center of the foyer of a house he believed belonged to his future son-in-law. Then the crowd physically parted like the Red Sea. Chloe emerged from the center of the dining hall, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She was wearing a custom pearl-encrusted white silk gown that clung perfectly to her figure. It was a breathtaking piece of Parisian haute couture, one that I specifically remembered approving the $60,000 wire transfer for just 3 months ago when Marcus claimed he needed a bridge loan for a corporate event. She looked like a pristine, untouchable angel, but her eyes burned with a toxic, desperate venom. She stomped across the marble floor, her expensive heels echoing like gunshots in the dead, silent room. Marcus trailed closely behind her, trying to maintain his Wall Street swagger, but his face drained of all color the second he saw the heavy portfolio in Jada's hands. He knew exactly who Jada was, and he knew exactly what her presence meant. Chloe did not care about the optics. She did not care about the elite audience of billionaires watching her every move. She only cared that I was breathing the same air and actively threatening her perfect stolen spotlight. She stopped 2 feet away from me, her chest heaving with rage, her face flushed and ugly mottled red. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face, her voice piercing the quiet room and shattering any remaining illusion of elegance. "Security!" Chloe screamed, her tone shrill, hysterical, and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Get this pathetic dropout out of my house." 4 burly private security guards materialized from the dark edges of the room, their earpieces buzzing as they moved rapidly toward the entryway. They were large, intimidating men, hired specifically to keep the riffraff away from Marcus's elite celebration. But before they could even set foot on the marble steps of the grand foyer, Marcus intercepted them with a sharp, frantic wave of his hand. He wanted to handle this personally. He needed to project an aura of absolute, unshakable dominance in front of his wealthy investors and his future in-laws. He could not afford to look like a man hiding behind hired muscle. He closed the distance between us with aggressive, heavy strides. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a thick vein pulsed visibly beneath the collar of his custom-tailored tuxedo. The heavy scent of his expensive imported cologne washed over me, failing entirely to mask the sharp metallic smell of his panicked sweat. He reached out aggressively and wrapped his fingers roughly around my upper arm, his grip bruising and desperate. "I told you," Marcus hissed. His voice dropped low enough to sound menacing, but carrying just enough volume for the first few rows of startled guests to hear every single word. "You have 30 days to get your trash out of my house. You have exactly 5 seconds to leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." I looked down at his hand, gripping the delicate silk of my emerald gown. I did not pull away. I did not shrink back. I let the excruciating silence stretch, forcing every single elite guest in the room to watch the supposed billionaire host physically manhandling a woman in the center of his own foyer. I wanted them to see the cracks in his perfectly polished facade. I wanted them to witness the desperate thug hiding beneath the expensive Italian wool. Then came the sound that had defined and tormented my entire childhood. It was a high, perfectly practiced musical laugh, designed specifically to echo across country club dining rooms and charity galas. Susan stepped forward, stepping directly into the center of the conflict. She was practically dripping in the heavy diamond necklace Marcus had purchased for her using stolen funds. She positioned herself right beside Chloe, presenting a unified, impenetrable wall of familial rejection. "Oh, Maya!" Susan laughed loudly for the crowd, shaking her head with an exaggerated expression of performative pity, begging for attention as always. "Cannot you stand to see your sister have the life you failed to keep?" She turned to her wealthy friends, gesturing toward me with her crystal champagne flute, as if I were a tragic, amusing exhibit. "You will all have to excuse my eldest daughter," she announced to the silent room of elites, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. She has always struggled with severe, crippling jealousy. When her own modest little career completely stalled out, she simply could not cope with Chloe marrying into such extraordinary, unparalleled success. It is truly tragic how bitterness can completely ruin a person. Richard stood right behind her, nodding in solemn, authoritative agreement. My own father was actively validating my mother's humiliating public performance, choosing a fraudulent son-in-law over his own flesh and blood. They were so utterly blinded by the blinding glare of Marcus's stolen wealth that they willingly and enthusiastically participated in my public execution. They wanted to cast me out to protect their golden ticket. Security! Richard added, his voice attempting to mimic Marcus's commanding authority, but sounding merely pompous. Please escort her out immediately. She is clearly unwell and disturbing the rehearsal dinner. We cannot have this kind of scene tonight. The security guards took another hesitant step forward, but Jada shifted slightly, raising the heavy leather-bound portfolio perfectly flat against her chest. The movement caught Marcus's eye, and I felt his bruising grip on my arm tremble just a fraction of an inch. He recognized the Vanguard Hospitality Group insignia deeply embossed on the dark leather cover. I could literally see the exact second his desperate brain tried to calculate how his supposedly destitute mid-level decorator ex-wife had acquired an executive dossier from the most powerful commercial real estate conglomerate on the entire eastern seaboard. The math was completely breaking his mind. I turned my attention back to Marcus, staring directly into his panicked, bloodshot eyes. I let the absolute suffocating silence of the room stretch out for one more excruciating, agonizing second. I did not flinch. I slowly raised my opposite hand and meticulously brushed his fingers off my arm, swatting his trembling hand away as if he were nothing more than a minor irritating pest that had landed on my sleeve. I am not trespassing, Marcus, I said, my voice carrying with absolute crystal-clear precision across the cavernous foyer, ringing loudly in the ears of every single guest. I am just here to conduct a property inspection. The crowd murmured collectively, utterly confused by the strange clinical terminology. Chloe scoffed loudly, crossing her arms tightly over her Parisian couture gown, her face twisting into an ugly sneer of pure disdain. A property inspection, Chloe sneered, taking an aggressive step closer to me. Are you completely delusional, Maya? You do not own this house. Marcus bought this estate. You are standing on his imported marble. You are breathing his air. You have absolutely nothing. Marcus did not buy anything, Chloe, I replied, my gaze locking onto my sister with lethal calm. Marcus leased this property under a fictitious shell company, utilizing a fraudulent letter of credit drawn from a collapsing hedge fund. And as of exactly 48 hours ago, that shell company completely and irreversibly defaulted on its initial deposit. I turned to Jada, holding out my open hand. She slapped the heavy leather portfolio into my palm with a deeply satisfying thud. I popped the heavy brass clasps and pulled out the primary original deed of ownership, complete with the raised municipal government seals and the official Vanguard Hospitality Group letterhead, shining under the chandelier light. You see, I continued holding the thick legal document up high for the entire room of elites to clearly witness this sprawling estate is a premier corporate holding belonging exclusively to Vanguard Hospitality. It is reserved strictly for our top-tier executive staff. And as the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions for Vanguard, I hold the primary undisputed legal deed to this property. Marcus took a sharp physical step backward, the last remaining color completely draining from his face. His mouth opened, working silently, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable Wall Street predator had suddenly been reduced to a gasping, cornered rat trapped in a cage of his own making. You are currently hosting an illegal, unpermitted gathering on my private corporate property, I announced, raising my voice to address the crowd of stunned, silent investors directly. Furthermore, the catering staff, the valets out front, and the string quartet currently playing in my garden have all been paid, using funds directly stolen from the retirement accounts of vulnerable senior citizens. The string quartet, who had been awkwardly holding their expensive instruments in the corner, immediately packed them away into their velvet cases and began sprinting toward the service exit. The wealthy guests exchanged horrified, panicked glances, the realization of their host's criminality setting in. That is an absolute lie, Susan shrieked, completely losing her refined composure. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered violently against the marble floor, the sharp, explosive sound echoing loudly through the room. Marcus is a legitimate billionaire. He manages a massive elite hedge fund. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them she is a liar. But Marcus could not tell them anything. He was staring past me, his eyes fixed on the heavy glass doors of the grand entrance. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the flashing red and blue lights of multiple federal tactical vehicles were just beginning to reflect brightly off the dark, pristine surface of the infinity pool. "He cannot tell you anything, Mother," I said, pointing toward the sweeping manicured driveway, where the federal agents were already pouring out of their armored SUVs, because he is officially out of time. The heavy oak front doors swung inward with a violent crash. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical gear poured into the grand foyer. Their heavy boots slammed against the imported marble, completely drowning out the gasps of the terrified high society guests. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a silver badge gleaming on his belt, stepped directly into the center of the room. He called out Marcus's full legal name, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, commanding him to freeze. The sheer speed of the federal mobilization was breathtaking. Agents immediately began fanning out across the property, securing the exits, instructing the catering staff to step away from their stations, and blocking the wealthy investors from leaving the premises. Marcus visibly recoiled. He threw his hands up in a placating gesture, his Wall Street arrogance desperately trying to override his blatant terror. He attempted to project authority, loudly demanding to see a warrant and threatening to call a team of elite corporate defense attorneys. He pointed at me, his finger shaking violently, and told the lead agent that I was a bitter, deranged ex-wife staging a malicious prank. The lead agent ignored him entirely. He pulled a thick stack of warrants from his jacket, explicitly detailing the wire fraud, the offshore embezzlement, and the systematic theft of $5 million from elderly pension funds. The entire room of elite investors gasped in collective horror. The people who had been drinking his champagne and toasting his brilliance moments ago were now physically backing away from him, treating him like a highly contagious disease. I did not let the federal agents have all the fun. I turned to Jada. She gave me a sharp, satisfied nod and handed over a sleek manila folder. A terrified waiter was standing frozen nearby, his hands trembling as he held a silver tray of untouched champagne flutes. I reached out and dropped the heavy folder directly onto the silver tray. The sharp, resounding thud echoed through the silent foyer. Marcus stared at the folder as if it were a live explosive. He knew his fraudulent hedge fund was collapsing, but he still believed he held the ultimate leverage. He still believed he possessed a multi-million-dollar estate and a newly minted, legally bound wife to serve as his shield. He was wrong on both counts. I walked slowly toward him, my emerald gown sweeping across the floor. "Marcus, you have lived here for 2 years as a guest of my LLC," I stated, my voice echoing with icy precision. "You spent months bragging to my family about your incredible financial genius. You thought you were so brilliantly hiding your assets from your shadow creditors by leasing this estate through a blind corporate subsidiary. But you were too arrogant to ever investigate the parent company pulling the strings. Vanguard Hospitality owns that subsidiary, and I own Vanguard. Every single rent payment you made with stolen funds went directly into my corporate accounts. You paid me to live in my house." Marcus shook his head frantically, his face glistening with a cold sweat. He insisted that I was lying. He desperately reminded the room that he had forced me to sign a legally binding breakup contract the day he kicked me out. He shouted that I had surrendered all my property rights. I offered him a cold, unsympathetic smile. "The breakup contract you forced me to sign was not a property surrender, Marcus. It was your formal resignation of residency. You were in such a frantic rush to throw me out and move Chloe into the master suite that you downloaded a generic corporate lease termination agreement. You demanded I sign it without reading it. But I did read it. I signed it as the property owner, accepting the immediate voluntary forfeiture of your tenant-at-will status. You legally evicted yourself." Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, physically shaking him. She screamed at him, demanding to know if he truly owned nothing. She looked around the lavish foyer, realizing that the crystal chandeliers, the imported marble, and the sprawling gardens did not belong to the man she had just married. They belonged to the sister she had relentlessly mocked and betrayed. Marcus tried to shush her, desperately whispering that he would fix it, but the damage was irreversible. I turned my attention to my sister, offering her the exact same condescending pity she had shown me for years. You wanted his life, Chloe, I said softly, and now you legally have it. Thanks to the brilliant advice from our mother and father, you bypassed a prenuptial agreement. You stood in a municipal courthouse today and merged your entire legal identity with a man facing a massive federal indictment. The government is going to seize every single bank account associated with his name. And because you are now his legal spouse, you are jointly responsible for the restitution of the $5 million he stole. You are not a billionaire's wife. You are an accessory to elder fraud. Susan covered her mouth, stifling a loud sob, while Richard looked like he was about to pass out. Their greed had literally handed their golden child a financial death sentence. I reached into the sleek manila folder resting on the silver tray. I pulled out the original certified deed of ownership and a crisp, freshly printed legal document bearing the official seal of the county sheriff. I held the papers up, stepping directly into Marcus's personal space. "This house is mine," I commanded, my voice slicing through the chaos. "You and your courthouse bride have until tomorrow morning to vacate my property." The silence that followed my eviction notice was absolute and suffocating. For a fraction of a second, Marcus just stared at the heavy legal document in my hand, his perfectly styled hair suddenly looking unkempt as a thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Then the raw survival instinct of a cornered predator kicked in. He threw his head back and let out a loud, painfully forced laugh that echoed harshly against the imported marble walls. He turned his back to me, addressing the massive crowd of terrified elites with wide, frantic gestures. He desperately tried to reclaim his stolen kingdom. "She is completely insane," Marcus announced, his voice practically cracking with the intense strain of projecting false confidence. "This is nothing but a pathetic, malicious stunt staged by a bitter ex-wife. She mocked up some fake documents because she simply cannot stand to see Chloe and me thriving. I manage an elite hedge fund. I have $10 million in liquid assets sitting in my primary accounts right this very second. I could buy this entire neighborhood in cash tomorrow morning if I wanted to." He looked toward Richard and Susan, silently begging them to validate his theatrical performance. My father opened his mouth, likely preparing to offer a blustering defense of his fraudulent son-in-law, but he never got the chance to speak a single word. Jada stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell. She simply let her cool, unwavering tone project perfectly across the cavernous, dead-silent room. "Actually, Marcus, your accounts hold exactly -$5 million. The entire foyer collectively gasped. Marcus whipped his head toward Jada, his eyes bulging with a volatile mixture of rage and terror. He opened his mouth to scream another denial, but Jada seamlessly cut him off, opening her thick leather portfolio with clinical, devastating precision. "I am the lead forensic accountant who audited your entire digital footprint," Jada stated, holding up a dense stack of highlighted banking records. "For the past 2 years, you have been operating a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme, masquerading as a high-yield wealth management firm. You have absolutely zero liquid assets. You have zero legitimate investments. Every single dollar of your supposed wealth is built entirely on fraudulent offshore wire transfers and stolen capital." She turned her gaze directly toward the crowd of wealthy investors, many of whom were Marcus's primary foundational clients. I watched the color rapidly drain from the faces of the city's financial elite as they realized the terrifying implications of Jada's words. "You did not just lose money on aggressive tech bets," Jada continued, her voice slicing through the thick tension like a surgical scalpel. "You actively and systematically looted the retirement accounts and pension funds of your most vulnerable clients. You siphoned those stolen funds through a labyrinth of shell companies stationed in the Cayman Islands to fund your designer suits, your luxury sports cars, and the massive deposit on this very estate." Marcus lunged forward, his hands balled into tight fists, but he froze entirely as the heavy glass doors behind us rattled. The federal agents were actively securing the perimeter outside their tactical gear, flashing under the exterior security lights. He was entirely trapped, boxed in by his own criminal arrogance. "Let us talk about the specific funding for tonight's lavish event," Jada said, pulling out a color-coded spreadsheet and turning it toward a group of older men standing near the grand staircase. Mr. Arthur Thorne and Mr. Elias Porter, I believe you are both in attendance tonight. Two distinguished elderly men stepped forward from the crowd. Arthur Thorne looked utterly bewildered, while Elias Porter gripped his silver-tipped cane with violently trembling hands. They were pillars of the local high society men who had trusted Marcus with their family's generational wealth. Jada looked directly at them, her expression filled with a grim, uncompromising pity. "The vintage champagne you are currently drinking," Jada announced, her voice echoing clearly off the high-vaulted ceilings, "was purchased utilizing a direct, unauthorized wire transfer from the Thorne Family Trust. The imported caviar and the live string quartet playing in the garden were funded entirely by liquidating the Porter family pension accounts. Every single element of this rehearsal dinner, including the custom couture gown currently being worn by the bride, was paid for with your stolen life savings." The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Arthur Thorne dropped his crystal champagne flute. It hit the marble floor with a sharp explosive crash, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sound broke the paralyzing spell, holding the crowd hostage. Elias Porter let out a strangled, agonizing gasp, clutching his chest as he stared at Marcus in absolute, unadulterated horror. Suddenly, the room erupted into total, uncontrolled chaos. The elite guests began dropping their glasses, the fragile crystal shattering against the imported stone in a cascade of sharp, violent sounds. The people who had been toasting Marcus's brilliance just moments ago were now physically backing away from him, their faces twisted in pure disgust and frantic panic. Wealthy investors scrambled to pull out their cell phones, desperately dialing their personal bankers and private defense attorneys in the middle of the night. Chloe stood completely frozen in the center of the destruction, her perfectly manicured hands covering her mouth. She looked down at her $60,000 Parisian gown, suddenly realizing she was wearing the stolen retirement funds of the elderly men standing right in front of her. Her fairy tale romance had instantly mutated into a highly publicized federal crime scene. Susan and Richard were backed against the grand staircase, looking like they had just been physically struck by a moving vehicle. The high society peers they had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at them with absolute, undeniable revulsion. My parents had proudly bragged about signing Marcus's marriage certificate just hours ago. They had publicly aligned themselves with a predator, and the entire social circle they worshipped was currently witnessing their catastrophic, permanent humiliation. Marcus fell to his knees. The arrogant, untouchable Wall Street titan completely collapsed under the crushing weight of the absolute truth. He covered his face with his trembling hands, letting out a pathetic, suffocated sob as the heavy front doors finally burst open and the federal agents stormed into the grand foyer. Dozens of heavily armed personnel wearing dark tactical vests emblazoned with bold yellow letters poured into the pristine entryway, their heavy boots trampling mercilessly over the shattered, glittering remains of Arthur Thorne's crystal champagne flute. The sheer scale of the federal mobilization was overwhelming. Agents immediately fanned out across the sprawling first floor, securing the perimeter, blocking the massive mahogany exit doors, and commanding the terrified, murmuring crowd of high society elites to remain exactly where they were. My parents, completely incapable of processing the catastrophic public implosion of their manufactured high society dreams, immediately went on the defensive. Their greed had so thoroughly blinded them to reality that they chose to fight federal law enforcement rather than admit they had been conned. Susan lunged forward physically, placing her body between the advancing tactical agents and Marcus, who was still trembling violently on the marble floor. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Jada and me, her voice shrill, hysterical, and echoing with desperate, unhinged denial. "You are arresting the wrong person!" Susan shrieked, her heavy diamond necklace shaking against her collarbone as her face mottled with an ugly, panicked rage. "These two women are malicious, jealous liars. My eldest daughter is a bitter, unstable failure who forged those real estate documents just to ruin her sister's wedding weekend. Marcus is a legitimate, highly respected hedge fund manager. You are completely ruining a private elite celebration based on the hysterical, fabricated ramblings of a jealous ex-wife. Richard quickly stepped up beside her, puffing out his chest in a pathetic, desperate attempt to assert his usual country club authority over the heavily armed federal agents. "I demand you leave this property immediately!" Richard bellowed, his face turning an unhealthy, dangerous shade of crimson. "I am a personal friend of the mayor and several district judges. If you do not turn around and march out of my future son-in-law's house right this second, I will have every single one of your badges on my desk by tomorrow morning." Elias Porter, the elderly billionaire whose pension funds had paid for the very floor my parents were standing on, slammed his silver-tipped cane sharply against the marble. "Shut your mouth, Richard, you absolute fool!" Elias barked, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "He stole our money. He is a common thief, and you are actively defending a criminal who robbed your own peers blind." The lead federal agent did not even blink at my parents' frantic, delusional screaming. He effortlessly stepped around Susan and Richard as if they were nothing more than minor, irritating obstacles, his cold, calculating eyes locking directly onto his target. Seeing the undeniable, terrifying reality of his situation, Marcus's fight-or-flight instinct violently kicked in. The arrogant Wall Street facade completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a cowardly, desperate criminal. He snapped out of his pathetic weeping breakdown and scrambled to his feet, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping wildly against the polished marble floor. He spun around and shoved violently past Chloe. He pushed his weeping, terrified bride aside with so much force that she stumbled backward into a catering table, completely ruining her $60,000 Parisian couture gown. Marcus did not even look back at her. He sprinted blindly toward the arched doorway leading to the formal dining hall, desperate to reach the rear service corridor that exited into the back gardens. "Stop him!" the lead agent barked, his voice slicing clean through the chaotic screams of the wedding guests. The entire estate erupted into absolute pandemonium. The deafening wail of approaching police sirens finally reached the property, growing louder and more suffocating by the second. The flashing red and blue lights from the armada of local police cruisers and federal armored vehicles outside pierced violently through the massive, ornate, stained glass windows of the formal dining hall. The shifting, frantic colors danced rapidly across the vaulted ceilings, painting the horrified faces of the billionaire investors and country club elites in chaotic, blinding strokes of crimson and blue. Marcus tore through the dining room, panting heavily, his custom tuxedo jacket flapping behind him as he dodged terrified guests and overturned cocktail tables. But he had fundamentally underestimated the sheer, overwhelming scale of the federal raid. The property was already completely surrounded, the perimeter locked down tight. As Marcus lunged desperately for the heavy glass patio doors, two massive tactical agents stepped out from the dark shadows of the outdoor catering prep station. They moved with terrifying, coordinated speed. Marcus let out a high, panicked yelp and tried to pivot his momentum, desperately trying to change direction on the slick hardwood floor. He never made it. The agents tackled him mid-stride. The sheer brutal force of their momentum launched Marcus directly into the center of the dining room, sending him crashing violently against the 6-foot-tall, custom-carved swan ice sculpture that he had specifically demanded as the luxurious centerpiece of his extravagant rehearsal dinner. The impact was deafening. The massive block of intricately carved ice splintered and fractured under his weight, sending huge, jagged chunks of freezing water crashing down onto the lavish buffet tables. The heavy ice crushed the imported caviar, shattered the crystal serving dishes, and completely flattened the expensive, exotic floral arrangements. Marcus collapsed hard onto the floor amidst the ruined, freezing banquet. He groaned in absolute breathless agony, his perfectly styled hair now plastered flat against his forehead with a mixture of freezing ice water and panicked sweat. The tactical agents did not give him a single second to recover his breath. They hauled him up roughly by the collar of his ruined-soaked tuxedo, pinning him face first against the remaining jagged base of the shattered ice sculpture. The freezing water soaked entirely through his expensive wool suit as they forced his arms painfully behind his back. Marcus Sterling, the lead agent, announced, striding calmly into the dining room and pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The loud metallic click of the cuffs ratcheting tightly around Marcus's wrists echoed with beautiful poetic finality across the stunned, dead-silent room. The glittering, untouchable billionaire was now just a soaking wet, shivering criminal pinned against a block of melting ice. "You are under arrest." The lead agent stated, his voice entirely devoid of any sympathy, projecting absolute, undeniable authority to every single horrified investor family member and guest watching the spectacle. "You are being formally charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement. Furthermore, based on the financial documents seized earlier this afternoon from your offshore accounts, you are also facing extensive consecutive charges for severe mortgage fraud." I stood quietly in the arched doorway of the dining room, watching the cold, hard steel bite deep into the wrists of the man who had spent the last 2 years actively trying to destroy my life. The illusion was completely dead, and the reality of his prison sentence had officially begun. Chloe snapped out of her paralyzed shock the moment the federal agents hauled Marcus roughly to his feet. The metallic clinking of the handcuffs seemed to break the spell holding her captive. She looked at the soaking wet, shivering man she had just sworn her life to, and her eyes widened in absolute terrified revulsion. The illusion of his billionaire status had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic criminal facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Self-preservation, the only trait my sister truly possessed in abundance, instantly took over. She physically recoiled from him, taking several rapid steps backward until her ruined, waterlogged couture gown hit the edge of a shattered buffet table. She threw her hands up in the air, her face twisting into a mask of frantic, desperate innocence. "Get away from me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed an accusing, trembling finger directly at Marcus. "I have absolutely nothing to do with him or his business. I do not know anything about stolen pension funds or offshore accounts. I am innocent. I am just his fiancé. We have not even had the ceremony yet. You cannot arrest me for his crimes." She turned pleadingly to the lead federal agent, tears of genuine panic finally streaming down her flushed cheeks, completely ruining her expensive bridal makeup. She tried to play the role of the naive, manipulated victim, desperately hoping her elite social status and designer clothes would shield her from the brutal reality of federal law enforcement. She expected the agents to treat her like a fragile socialite caught in the crossfire. The lead agent did not even glance in her direction. He continued reading Marcus his Miranda rights with cold, mechanical efficiency. Marcus stared at Chloe, his bloodshot eyes wide with absolute betrayal. In the very first moment of real adversity, his perfect trophy bride was entirely ready to throw him to the wolves to save her own skin. "That is a fascinating legal defense," Chloe Jada interjected, stepping smoothly around the shattered remains of the ice sculpture. Jada offered my sister a cold, razor-sharp smile that completely drained the remaining oxygen from the room. She held up a crisp, legally certified document bearing the raised seal of the municipal court. "Actually," Chloe Jada announced, her voice projecting with absolute devastating clarity for every remaining guest and federal agent to hear. "Public records show that you legally married him this past Tuesday. Marcus convinced you to bypass a prenuptial agreement and sign a confidential, expedited marriage certificate at the courthouse, likely claiming he needed your legal signature to transfer funds from a locked offshore account for this very party." Chloe froze, all the frantic energy instantly leaving her body. Her jaw dropped open as she stared at the certified marriage license in Jada's hand. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. As of Tuesday morning, Jada continued stepping closer to my trembling sister. "You are his legally recognized spouse. You are no longer just a fiancé playing dress-up. Your financial identity is entirely merged with his. And because you are his legal wife, his assets, and more importantly, his staggering astronomical debts are now completely tied to you. You are legally tethered to a man who owes $5 million in federal restitution. Congratulations on the wedding." Susan let out a strangled, breathless gasp and collapsed heavily onto the bottom step of the grand staircase. She grabbed the oak banister to keep herself from tumbling to the floor. Richard rushed to her side, his face completely devoid of color. The sheer magnitude of the financial ruin was finally crashing down on them. Their golden child, the daughter they had worshipped and paraded around as the ultimate symbol of their social climbing success, was now financially radioactive. "This is impossible!" Richard yelled, his voice shaking with undisguised panic. He glared at Jada and me, desperately trying to reassert his crumbling authority. "We will hire the best legal team in the state. We will get the marriage instantly annulled. We will prove she was coerced under fraudulent pretenses." "You can certainly try, Richard," I replied, stepping forward to stand beside Jada. "But the federal government moves much faster than divorce court. By tomorrow morning, the FBI will freeze every single bank account holding Chloe's name. They will freeze the joint accounts she just opened with Marcus. They will seize her trust fund. They will put a lien on any property she owns. The authorities will scrutinize every single expensive gift, every designer dress, and every piece of diamond jewelry Marcus purchased for her over the last 2 years because those items were bought with stolen money. They will claw back every single penny to pay back the elderly investors he robbed. She is entirely ruined." Chloe slowly sank to her knees right there in the middle of the dining room. She did not care about the freezing water pooling on the floor or the shattered glass surrounding her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ugly, hyperventilating sobs. She had spent her entire life stepping on others to climb to the top, and now she was anchored to a sinking ship with absolutely no life rafts available. But the federal government was not the only problem Marcus had created. A sudden sharp buzzing sound cut through the heavy, suffocating tension of the room. Marcus's cell phone, which had fallen out of his tuxedo jacket during the tackle, was vibrating violently against the polished surface of a nearby mahogany console table. The bright screen illuminated the dark wood, displaying an encrypted international caller ID. Marcus jerked his head toward the buzzing phone, a new, entirely different kind of terror washing over his pale face. The federal agents had him secured, but his eyes were fixed on that glowing screen as if it were a loaded weapon aimed directly at his chest. Jada glanced at the caller ID and let out a low, knowing chuckle. She looked back at my parents, who were staring at the buzzing phone with growing dread. "Do you know who that is?" Richard Jada asked, pointing a manicured finger at the vibrating device. "Because it is not the police. Marcus needed immediate capital to fund this lavish lifestyle after his hedge fund collapsed. He took out massive high-interest loans from unregulated private equity lenders operating strictly in the shadows. He used this very estate, a property he never legally owned, as the primary collateral to secure those loans." The phone continued to buzz relentlessly, an ominous mechanical heartbeat echoing in the silent room. "Those private loan sharks do not file lawsuits," Jada explained, her voice dropping to a chilling, serious register. "They do not send strongly worded letters from attorneys. They operate outside the law, and they expect to be paid back with aggressive punitive interest. They have just watched their primary collateral evaporate, and they know Marcus is going to federal prison. The FBI is going to put Marcus in a highly secure, heavily guarded cell tonight. He will be safe from them." I turned my gaze down to Chloe, who was kneeling in the freezing water, staring at the buzzing phone with wide, unblinking eyes of pure horror. "But you, Chloe," I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow. "You are his legal wife. You are entirely responsible for his debts. And you are going to be out here walking the streets totally exposed, answering the phone when they call to collect." The glowing screen of Marcus's phone illuminated Chloe's terrified face for a fraction of a second before I turned my back on the wreckage of their lives and walked out into the cool night air. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the absolute destruction of Marcus Sterling was broadcasting on every major financial news network in the country. I sat behind the expansive walnut desk in my corner office on the top floor of my actual corporate headquarters, sipping a black coffee while watching the muted television screens mounted on the wall. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screens were merciless. "Elite wealth manager exposed in massive Ponzi scheme. Federal raid nets millions in fraudulent assets. Marcus was currently sitting in a federal holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit. The judge had officially denied bail before sunrise, citing him as an extreme flight risk with too many dangerous ties to unregulated offshore entities. He was trapped in a concrete box, completely isolated from the violent loan sharks who were now furiously hunting down his assets. And his primary legally bound asset was currently walking the streets." My intercom buzzed softly, breaking the quiet sanctuary of my office. My executive assistant's voice came through the speaker, sounding highly apologetic, but laced with an undeniable undercurrent of alarm. She informed me that building security was requesting my immediate presence in the main lobby. 3 individuals were causing a frantic disturbance, refusing to leave the premises and loudly claiming to be my immediate family. I set my coffee cup down with a quiet, deliberate clink against the ceramic saucer. I smoothed the lapels of my perfectly tailored charcoal suit, stepped out of my office, and took the private executive elevator down to the ground floor. The grand lobby of my headquarters was a soaring expanse of imported slate-brushed steel and floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the bustling financial district. It was a monument to genuine, hard-earned success. Standing in the very center of that immaculate space, completely surrounded by my stoic, broad-shouldered security team, were the shattered remnants of my family. The transformation that he had undergone in just 10 short hours was nothing short of breathtaking. The arrogant, untouchable country club elites from the rehearsal dinner had been entirely eradicated. Richard was wearing the exact same suit from the night before, but the fabric was heavily wrinkled, smelling faintly of stale sweat and sheer panic. His normally pristine silver hair was sticking up in erratic tufts. Chloe looked like a hollowed-out ghost. She was clutching a cheap, oversized coat around her shoulders, shivering violently, her eyes darting around the lobby like a hunted animal. The heavy, dark smudges of ruined mascara under her eyes made her look feral. She had spent the entire night fielding terrifying phone calls from blocked international numbers, her fairy tale romance violently mutating into an inescapable nightmare of debt collectors and federal subpoenas. But it was Susan who presented the most pathetic spectacle. When she caught sight of me stepping out of the executive elevator, a volatile mixture of desperate relief and stark terror washed over her aged face. She shoved past the security guards who were gently trying to usher her toward the revolving doors. Susan sprinted across the polished slate floor and did something I never in my entire 34 years of existence thought I would ever witness. My haughty, image-obsessed mother completely collapsed. She dropped physically to her knees right in the center of my corporate lobby, the hard stone echoing with the sharp impact. "Maya, please," Susan shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly against the high glass walls, drawing the shocked stares of arriving executives and administrative staff. "Please, you have to help us. The feds locked down everything." Elias Porter and Arthur Thorne filed emergency civil injunctions at dawn. They seized our bank accounts. They froze the house. We have absolutely nothing left. We lost our entire retirement in one night. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my tailored slacks. But I took a smooth, clinical step backward, keeping myself entirely out of her reach. "They are coming after me!" Chloe suddenly sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine as she hugged her arms tightly across her chest. "The feds were at our apartment this morning. They took my computer. They took my jewelry. They said I am a co-conspirator because I signed that stupid marriage license. Maya, please, the men calling his phone last night told me I owe them the money. They know where I live. They know my name. You have to hire us a defense team." Richard stepped forward, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, his hands shaking violently at his sides. He looked at the vast, luxurious lobby of the company I had built from the ground up, the very company he had sneered at and dismissed as a pathetic little hobby for years. "We are begging you, Maya." Richard pleaded, his voice nothing more than a pathetic, suffocated rasp. "Chloe is going to be federally investigated. They are going to throw her in prison. You have the money. We can see that now. We were wrong, we were so incredibly wrong, but you have to bail us out. You are the only one who can save us from this. We are blood." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the 3 people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. I looked at the mother who had laughed at my struggles, the father who had weaponized his affection, and the sister who had happily stolen my savings to fund her fraudulent delusions of grandeur. They were offering no genuine apologies for the decades of emotional abuse. They were not sorry for how they had treated me. They were only sorry that their golden ticket had turned out to be a ticking time bomb, and now they desperately wanted to use my hard-earned wealth as a human shield against the horrific consequences of their own blinding greed. I looked down at my mother, who was still weeping on her knees on the cold slate floor. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the absolute humiliation of their public begging. "You've always been too emotional, Mom," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any warmth, slicing cleanly through the quiet lobby. Susan froze, her tear-streaked face snapping upward, her eyes widening in horrific realization as she recognized the exact cruel words she had weaponized against me at our Thanksgiving dinner just 2 years ago, when I had first suspected Marcus was a fraud. "You need to be more independent." I continued, my tone perfectly level, echoing the exact dismissive cadence she had used when she abandoned me. "You'll be fine. Just pack your things." I turned my back on them without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. I gave a sharp, subtle nod to my head of security, signaling him to permanently remove the trespassers from my property. As the heavy glass doors of the private elevator closed silently in front of me, shutting out the frantic, echoing screams of my ruined family, I pressed the button for the top floor and went back to work. I leaned toward the brushed steel intercom panel inside the ascending elevator cabin before the heavy glass doors fully sealed me away from their hysteria. I pressed the communication button linking directly to the earpiece of my head of security. "Marcus!" I stated, my voice echoing with icy, uncompromising authority. "Escort those 3 individuals out of the building immediately. Do not allow them to collect themselves or linger in the atrium. If they resist your team in any way, call the city police and press formal trespassing charges. Once they are physically removed from the property, revoke any guest clearance they might have bypassed to gain entry. I want them permanently banned from the premises. Their names and faces are to be flagged at every entrance, parking garage, and service elevator. They are never to set foot in my headquarters again." "Understood perfectly, Ms. Thorne." His deep professional voice crackled back through the speaker. "We are removing them now." Through the descending glass panels of the private elevator, I watched the satisfying execution of my orders. 6 broad-shouldered security guards closed in around my screaming mother, my defeated father, and my hysterically weeping sister. They formed an impenetrable human wall, physically marching my ruined bloodline backward toward the revolving exit doors. I watched the floor numbers tick upward, feeling the last remaining threads of toxic obligations snap and dissolve into nothingness. I walked into my executive suite, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and immediately got back to work building my empire. They were no longer my problem. They were just a closed account. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air whipped across the expansive wraparound balcony of my new penthouse, overlooking the glittering Boston skyline. The sprawling, multi-million-dollar property was a testament to raw, unapologetic success, featuring imported marble flooring, custom architectural lighting, and unobstructed panoramic views of the financial district I now dominated. I clinked my crystal champagne flute against Jada's glass. The sharp, clear chime resonated beautifully against the backdrop of the vibrant city below. To the Hawthorne Tower acquisition, Jada declared, her dark eyes gleaming with absolute professional triumph as she took a sip of the vintage champagne. "We closed the deal a full week ahead of schedule, and you absolutely decimated their initial asking price. The board is thrilled, and your market valuation just spiked another 12%. To ruthless efficiency," I replied, savoring the crisp taste of the victory. "And to having a chief financial officer who knows exactly where all the leverage is hidden." We leaned against the thick glass railing, looking out over the sprawling city. The lights pulsed with life, representing endless possibilities and untethered freedom. We had transformed my independent wealth management firm into an untouchable corporate juggernaut. Jada was no longer just the forensic auditor who helped me expose a massive fraud. She was my closest confidant and my most lethal business partner. Speaking of ruthless efficiency, Jada murmured, a highly satisfied smile playing on her lips as she swirled the champagne in her elegant flute. The final sentencing transcripts for the federal fraud case came across my desk this morning. The presiding judge did not show a single ounce of leniency to the man who tried to steal our client's futures. I kept my gaze fixed on the bright skyline, feeling a profound sense of closure. How bad was the final ruling for the golden boy? 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Jada stated the immense weight of the sentence echoing perfectly in the quiet night air. No possibility of early parole, no minimum security country club prison. The SEC permanently barred him from trading any financial assets, and the judge ordered absolute total restitution. Marcus is going to spend the next decade and a half locked inside a heavily guarded concrete box, completely stripped of the stolen luxury he used to build his pathetic, fragile ego. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my drink, and the blushing bride, Jada, let out a sharp, cynical laugh that cut through the evening breeze. Chloe is experiencing a rather brutal, highly educational introduction to the working class. Because she foolishly signed that expedited marriage certificate without a prenuptial agreement, the IRS held her completely and legally liable for the fraudulent marital debt and the massive unpaid taxes on Marcus's stolen capital. The federal government seized her entire trust fund, liquidated every single bank account bearing her name, and repossessed every designer asset she owned. I heard through our legal contacts that she is currently working double shifts at a greasy 24-hour diner just off the interstate. She is spending her days scrubbing sticky booths and serving late-night truckers, desperately trying to pay off the massive federal fines before the government garnishes her minimum wage paychecks. The vivid image of my spoiled, hopelessly arrogant sister who once mocked my ambition and paraded around in stolen couture gowns, now wearing a stained polyester uniform and smelling of fryer grease, was the ultimate poetic justice. She had eagerly married for stolen money, and she had inherited absolute, inescapable ruin. What about Susan and Richard, I asked, feeling absolutely nothing for the people who had raised me to be their designated scapegoat. Complete and utter bankruptcy, Jada replied, her tone turning clinical, hard, and deeply satisfied. When Elias Porter and Arthur Thorne filed those aggressive civil suits, the resulting legal fees instantly drained whatever legitimate cash your parents had left hidden away. The bank aggressively foreclosed on their massive country club estate. They lost the luxury cars, the elite memberships, and their entire fabricated social standing. The high society friends they worshipped dropped them instantly the moment the FBI raided the rehearsal dinner. They are currently living in a tiny rundown single-wide trailer in a dilapidated park 2 towns over. It has a rusted aluminum roof and no central heating. They tried reaching out to my office last month begging for a meeting with you. And your response, I blocked the number, marked it as hostile spam, and instructed the reception desk to hang up immediately if they ever call back. Jada said smoothly, raising her glass in a mock salute. They are entirely permanently cut off, just like you ordered. I turned away from Jada and looked back out at the glowing, vibrant city skyline. The towering skyscrapers stood like glowing monuments to hard work, singular vision, and relentless independence. I had successfully survived my family's relentless emotional abuse. I had survived their malicious attempts to drain my worth and diminish my hard-earned success. I had taken the shattered, broken pieces of the life they tried to systematically destroy and forged a weapon of absolute, impenetrable success. I inhaled the crisp, clean night air, feeling a profound, unshakable peace settle deep into my bones. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation were permanently, violently broken. I owed them absolutely nothing. I was entirely free. They thought my independence was a weakness. I said quietly, my voice carrying the steady, resonant conviction of a woman who had fought for and ultimately won her own total liberation. They didn't realize it was the weapon that made me untouchable. Have you ever let your success be your loudest revenge? Tell me your story in the comments. The profound lesson embedded within this narrative is the undeniable power of inner strength over toxic familial validation. For years, the family relentlessly attempted to diminish her worth, worshiping superficial status and fraudulent wealth while dismissing her hard work. However, her deliberate choice to walk away and independently cultivate her own success ultimately became her impenetrable shield. True security does not emerge from the conditional approval of those who continually undermine you. It is forged through unwavering autonomy, resilience, and personal integrity. By refusing to rescue her abusers, she reclaimed her power. Please share your stories in the comments below.